The snow at the cave entrance was stained almost entirely red. As the roars of battle faded, the squigs rushed in, squeaking with excitement. These little creatures, usually timid as mice, now had eyes bright with glee as they circled the corpses. Some poked the stiff faces of the Skaven with their tiny claws, others grabbed broken bone clubs and waved them about. A few bolder ones leapt on the body piles, dancing as if at a carnival. "Damn it, these runtlings are happier than anyone," Shito laughed, leaning on his iron axe. His arm still bled from a clan rat's bite, the wound burned, but the sight warmed him in a strange way. The greenskins were already in chaos. The goblin lads squatted by the heaps, hacking off Skaven heads with stone axes. Some cut crookedly, mangling necks. Others ripped heads clean off and threaded them on rags at their waists like grotesque necklaces. Crooked Mouth held up a clan rat fang, threading a rope through it. "This tooth's sharp. Hang it on a bow. Scare off the little runts." Big Valley was more blunt. He pried a claw from a slave rat's paw, bit down on it, and grinned. "Tough as a rock. Good for scraping." Nearby goblins copied him. Some pulled fur from carcasses, others smashed bones to get marrow, and one boy tried to wrap a Skaven tail around his arm, swearing it would bring luck. "Stop fooling around," Shito slammed his axe into the ground. "Carry these rat corpses back. The mushroom beds need fertilizer, and pick up everything useful, iron shards, bones, wood. Take all you can carry." He added, "Nobody chew on Skaven meat. It's filthy. If I catch anyone gnawing, I'll break his legs." They grumbled. Greenskins believed in tasting the spoils, but none dared disobey their boss. The goblin lads hauled bodies. If one couldn't lift a corpse alone, two did it together. The squigs burrowed under the piles, dragging out iron and wood. Crooked Mouth had the archers gather broken spears and ruined bows, tying them into bundles with vines. "Back to the tribe," a goblin lad called, shouldering a body. His hide armor was soaked in blood, but his face beamed. "Drink, drink," the greenskins shouted, swagging toward the cave mouth with bodies and loot. Their footprints wove in the snow, blood and mud, and carried an odd excitement. Someone started a chant. It had no tune, only loud wags and crude phrases like "smash the rats" and "grab the loot," but they sang it as if to shake the sky. Crooked Mouth's voice cracked highest and most off-key, making everyone laugh. Big Valley shouted the loudest, brandishing a corpse. Shito hummed along, and though his throat was raw, the fatigue and frustration in his chest eased with every shout. "Iron boots crush the grass. Axe marks make it tougher. We greenskins, our skulls beat stone. Don't believe it? Take a club to the head. The flag's ragged, but still we wave it. We shout till throats spark like fires. Whack! The word leaps from our guts. We kill till even birds won't sing. Dwarves' broken forts, we'll smash 'em with our heads. Human knights will yank their horses' tails. Magic light, that's for weaklings. One swing, the wizards cry, 'Daddy!' Blood on the face, wipe it when it itches. Broken bones as necklaces, jingling happy. As long as arms can swing, we won't rest. This land will listen to greenskins' shouts. Gulp some maggot water. Villagers down below, wait for the knife. Bones smashed to bits. Whack! If the sky falls, we'll pile corpses to build a nest. They were wounded, arms in slings, legs bitten and limping, faces scratched and still bleeding, but none complained. Greenskin joy was simple. Win a fight, steal something, be alive. That was enough. By the time they reached the tribe, the sun was lowering in the west. The squigs outside the fence had been waiting, and at the first sign of the main force, they squealed and rushed forward to help carry spoil. Shito stood in the tribe's center, surveying the battered lads who'd fought beside him, some missing teeth, some ears torn away, bandaged limbs. He walked to the most prominent spot he'd had the squigs pile with stones, the crooked little statue of Gork and Mork. It was lopsided and disproportionate, with an oversized head, but they worshipped it all the same. A few gnawed bones were placed as offerings. "Everyone, gather," Shito yelled. The greenskins quieted and crowded around the statue. The squigs squeezed in at the edges. The goblin lads stood in the middle, still clutching Skaven teeth. The archers and spearmen lined up at the front, exhausted but upright. Shito looked at them and declared, "Today we smashed the rats. We protected the tribe. But that's not enough." He raised his injured arm. "I want the Blackrock lads to be as strong as me, tough fighters. I want anyone who dares cross us to taste the iron axe." "Awoo, boss is right," they answered, voices shaking the snow. Then a cold, clear voice spoke inside Shito's head, louder than before. System update complete. Shamanic magic will newly added. Host upgraded to LV5, consuming 150 points of WAH energy. Congratulations, Host has completed the Outnumbered Victory achievement. Host will evolve from Gretchen to Goblin. Evolution starting. Evolution complete. Host becomes a greenskin goblin, acquiring the trait Rookie Shaman. Trait Rookie Shaman. You can use WAH energy to cast minor work spells. Shito froze. Before he could react, a ball of green light wrapped his body. It was warm, like hot water. The pain in his arm eased, and the exhaustion drained away. He felt himself stretch, bones cracking, muscles swelling. His frame, already tougher than a common Gretchen's, inflated upward. The greenskins gaped, speechless. The squigs squeaked and backed off, then edged forward again. The goblin lad's eyes widened, and the skaven teeth they clutched clattered to the ground. When the light faded, Shito looked down at himself. He was no longer a Gretchen. He'd grown nearly half a head taller, his shoulders broad enough for 2 logs, arms thick with muscle, green skin tinged with a healthy sheen despite the blood. The iron axe fit perfectly in his hands. Boss turned into a goblin. Crooked mouth blurted, trembling with excitement. He's stronger. He'll ruin faces. Big Valley pumped his fists. At the same moment, Scarface, who'd stayed close to Shito, was also wrapped in green light. He, too, had grown, taller than a Gretchen and sharper-eyed where he'd once been blunt-headed. Shito glanced at his hands, then at the cheering clan. He lifted his iron axe and roared at the statue of Gork and Mork. Gork and Mork, make every lad who fights with us stronger. As he finished, countless beams of green light swept through the tribe. The fiercest goblin lads, the ones who'd fought bare-handed or held shields against clan rats, were bathed in light. Their bones cracked and popped. Many grew taller. Some gained thick, muscled arms. Wooden sticks shifted into iron-tipped spears or sturdier bows. Crude hide armor forming on their torsos, they'd become goblin spearmen and archers. Then the current goblin archers and spearmen were touched again. They grew another size, their spear tips sharper, bows gaining a sheen. The wild ferocity in their eyes gave way to agility and cunning. They'd become elite archers and elite spearmen. The green light kept moving. Among the squigs outside the fence, many grew a bit larger and clearer-eyed, Peejing laborers. A few of those were hit by an even brighter glow. They became sturdier, their eyes sparking with cleverness, and their simple tools refined into chisels and picks. They'd become Peejing sappers. The tribe erupted. I'm a spearman now. I've got an iron spear, a newly evolved lad shouted, hopping while clutching his spear. My bow's stronger, an elite archer tested, drawing a humming string. I can chisel stone. A Peejing sapper scratched a crooked W into the ground. Those who hadn't been chosen still cheered. One lad rubbed his arm, muttering, Mustn't have hit those rats hard enough. Next time I'll fight harder. A Gretchen clenched his claws. I'll go haul logs at the lumberyard tomorrow. I'll get stronger for sure. Shito stood before the statue, watching the tribe celebrate, green eyes glittering. Snow drifted onto his shoulders, but he felt no cold. He knew the good days for the Blackrock tribe had only begun. Whack! Shito raised his iron axe and roared to the sky. Whack! Whack! The greenskins' cries echoed through the valley, drowning the wind and snow, ringing long through the howling forest. The bonfire in the boss's house burned bright, pine logs crackling and driving back the chill. Stone sat on a stone slab draped with animal hides, rubbing his still sore arm. His wounds had closed considerably during the evolution, but the ache from the brutal fight lingered. He lifted his hand and made a sweeping gesture. A faint green light screen, visible only to him, flickered into being, the upgraded system interface. It was clearer than before, and a shimmering icon labeled Shaman System had appeared on the left. Stone tapped it with his mind, and the interface switched. Lines of green text scrolled up. Host has unlocked Shaman System Special. Description. No need to learn WAH, energy, and spells through traditional methods. Spells can be obtained directly through the system. Cannot channel the tribe's collective WAG energy. Spell power is limited by individual WAG value. Currently exchangeable spells, none requires accumulation of WAG value. Spell levels, common, uncommon, rare, exquisite. Hint, spell consumption scales with power. Higher level spells consume more WAG value. Stone grinned at the words, "No need to learn the old way." He'd heard from the caravan humans that greenskin shamans had to apprentice under elder shamans for years, eating strange mushrooms and performing rituals just to cast a pitiful fireball. The system had handed him a backdoor, magic without the slog. It felt like being treated as something high class. He'd miss being able to call on the tribe's collective wog like a great shaman, but that was a small loss. The Black Rock tribe was so small now that even pooled wog wouldn't amount to much. It was more practical to learn to cast whenever he wanted, without begging for permission. "Once I've got enough wog value, I'll buy a spell that beats people up," he murmured, stroking his chin. The idea of swinging his iron axe and hurling fire or lightning in the same fight made his eyes light up. He flicked to other system menus and brightened. New features had appeared on the right side of the screen. Building upgrade had been added. Stone clicked in, and a dense list of upgrades filled the display. Lumberyard. Upgrade to large lumberyard. Wood production doubled. Requires 100 wood, 50 stone. Quarry. Upgrade to large quarry. Stone production doubled. Requires 100 stone, 50 wood. Statue of Gork and Mork. Upgrade to Grand Statue of Gork and Mork. Unlocks greenskin shaman training. Requires 200 wood, 200 stone, 10 iron scraps. Boss's house. Upgrade to Boss's mansion. Raises greenskin morale. Reduces rebellion chance. Requires 150 wood, 100 stone, 5 iron scraps. Mushroom field. Upgrade to level 2 mushroom field. Mushroom production doubled. Unlocks new mushroom varieties. Automatically generates 10 Gretchen and 3 goblins weekly. Requires 100 wood, 50 stone. Stone's eyes gleamed. The old system had shown maps and handed out a few tasks. This one could upgrade buildings. Doubled production, automatic troop generation, even shaman training. Each upgrade was a massive leap. If he could get all of these done, the Blackrock tribe wouldn't just survive. It could thrive. He ran through the possibilities. Right now, the Gretchen and goblins grew only by raiding and capturing, their numbers creeping up painfully slowly. A level 2 mushroom field would spit out 10 Gretchen and 3 goblins every week. Population growth without fighting. In a few seasons, the tribe could swell from a few hundred greenskins to thousands. The Grand Statue would allow the tribe to train shamans. He didn't need it himself, but more magic users on the battlefield throwing fire and lightning alongside the axemen made his blood race. And upgrading the boss's house to a mansion would lower rebellion risk. Greenskins were wild and unruly. Anything that made them more docile would save him a lot of trouble. This upgrade came at the perfect time, Stone exclaimed, standing and pacing. The bloodstains on his hide coat didn't dampen his mood. He grabbed the beast-tooth short spear he'd pried from an orc skeleton and flicked the spearhead with a finger. Once the buildings are upgraded, the Blackrock tribe will go from a village to a real stronghold. We'll take the Eastern Canyon and the rocky Western Beach as outposts. Then we can beat up whoever we want. Practicalities pulled him back down. The materials for those upgrades weren't small. Just the lumberyard and quarry upgrades would take 200 wood and 200 stone, plus iron scraps for the statue and mansion. After the recent fight, they'd scavenged a lot of Ratman corpses for fertilizer, but wood and stone reserves were thin. "We need to focus on infrastructure," Stone said, hanging the spear on the wall, his expression hardening. Outside, snow still fell, tapping at the wooden window. It would not be an excuse for laziness. The greenskins weren't afraid of cold or work. He pushed the door open, and a gust of icy wind and flying snow stung his face, clearing his head. The tribe was still buzzing from the recent evolution. Crooked Mouth led a handful of elite archers in an archery contest. Iron arrows thudded into tree trunks, and the red cloth target was riddled with holes. Big Valley marshaled the Peejing laborers to drag Ratman corpses to the mushroom field, heavy loads that bent the squig's short legs, but no one complained. Scarface stood by the fence, slowly and expertly using a stone chisel to repair splintered boards. "Crooked Mouth, Big Valley," Stone called. The two goblins ran over, Crooked Mouth's quiver slung over his shoulder, Big Valley's green hide streaked with mud and blood, both lively and eager. "Boss, what do you need?" Crooked Mouth asked. "Crooked Mouth, take your archers to the lumberyard and cut down every tree you can find. Pine, oak, more is better," Stone said, pointing east. Have the squigs haul it and stack it in the tribe center. Keep it dry. Got it. Crooked Mouth bounded away with his bow, shouting back to rally the lads. Whoever cuts the most gets 2 extra pieces of meat tonight. Big Valley, take the spearmen to the quarry and dig deeper. Pry up every slab and smash every rock you can. Bring it all back. Watch your feet. Stone turned to Big Valley. Understood. Big Valley shouted, racing toward the quarry and calling his crew. Stone watched them go, then looked out toward the snow-dusted forest, a strange calm settling over him. The system upgrade had given him direction. The building upgrades gave him goals. If the greenskins were willing to work, Blackrock's fortunes would only rise. The day's noises, trees cracking at the lumberyard, chisels ringing in the quarry, squigs squeaking and goblins whooping, combined into a messy, vigorous song. Stone leaned on the fence, iron axe in hand, green eyes gleaming. There would be long days ahead, cutting wood, hauling stone, upgrading structures, but he wasn't afraid. Fear wasn't a word the greenskin tongue used. When spring comes, we'll have a large lumberyard and a large quarry, he muttered with a grin. Then the whole howling forest will know the Blackrock tribe isn't to be messed with. The wind still blew across the snowy land, but Stone felt this winter a little less cold. The biting wind, like a row of blunt knives, howled through the bare branches of the howling forest, lifting snow and dead leaves and slapping them against the wooden palisade of the Blackrock tribe. Frost trembled on the twigs. Now and then a shard of ice fell and shattered into glitter on the snow. A month had passed since the last bloody clash with the Skaven, and winter had settled over the woods, but it hadn't slowed the tribe's rapid growth. The lumberyard held piles of timber as high as small hills. Newly cut stone slabs from the quarry were stacked neatly, and under burlap canopies, the mushroom beds were sprouting a fresh crop with plump white caps. The whole place hummed with energy. At 7 in the morning, the first weak rays of sun pried through the cloud bank and barely lit the chief's hut. She too woke on time from his wooden bed. The thick goatskin beneath him was soft and warm, keeping the winter down. The bed had been made for him by the grot engineers, thick, carved legs and a base of 3 thin planks. Crude, but 100 times better than sleeping on bare straw. For a greenskin tribe still short on resources, that luxury was something. He stretched, joints popping softly. The hut was 2 stories. Downstairs was a roomy council hall with a large, smoothly finished stone slab in the center where greenskins reported, argued, and planned. Spare stone axes and iron spears were piled in a corner, alongside burlap sacks of dried mushrooms. Upstairs was his private space. The bed, a wooden cabinet where his beast-hide coat and the captured iron axe were hung, and a small table with a pottery bowl he'd salvaged from the ruins of the Skaven village after their last raid. The grots had carved the furniture from his memories of another life. Raw, but it made life civilized instead of savage. He rubbed his eyes and was about to get up when a pale green system interface blinked in front of him, the text stealing his cheer. New month's territory income and expenditure settlement. Income 271 teeth, expenditure 399 teeth, remaining inventory 1,029 teeth. Shito frowned, fingers going back to the goatskin. Teeth were the tribe's currency. Goblin teeth counted as 1 unit each. Orc teeth were thicker and worth 2, while grot teeth were brittle and essentially garbage. By tribal law, each goblin paid 4 teeth per month as a territory tax. 2 teeth covered daily maintenance, toolware, mushroom fertilizer, and the like, and the remaining 2 teeth were the territory's net income. But everyone in the tribe needed upkeep. Goblins 2 teeth a month, grots 1 tooth a month. Every month the books were in the red. This month's shortfall was 128 teeth. At the current burn rate, the stock of 1,029 teeth would last at most half a year. Damn, this money burns fast, he muttered. He knew greenskin nature. Trying to save by cutting back was useless. If goblins paid taxes but got nothing in return, they'd grumble. If grots didn't have enough to eat, they wouldn't have the strength to work. Greenskins solved shortage problems bluntly. If they lacked something, they went and took it. If teeth weren't enough, they'd go get more from other tribes. That thought eased his mood. He swung his legs off the bed and trudged downstairs. The campfire in the corner still held warmth, and beside it lay a piece of roasted lamb left from last night, skin crackled, a little oil shining in the seams. Shito grabbed it, tore off a chunk, and shoved it into his mouth. The meat was rich, touched by smoke. He closed his eyes with satisfaction. They'd slaughtered this goat 2 days ago. When they just finished upgrading the lumberyard, he'd ordered Fatso to roast a whole lamb so everyone could gorge themselves. The memory of that meal had done more than fill bellies. Just as he munched, the door creaked, and Scarface came in, snow clinging to his shoulders. He'd grown sturdier, nearly the size of a common goblin now, and he carried a lotus leaf parcel that wrapped half a dried squig. "Boss, I brought something to eat," Scarface said, voice clearer than before, eyes eager as he handed it over. Shito brightened. He opened the parcel. The squig was dark brown, firm, with a faint salty tang. Squigs lurked at the bottoms of the pond beside the mushroom beds, slippery and maddening to catch. At first, 10 grots might sink down and come up empty half a day. Shito had ordered 100 grots to take shifts guarding the pond with nets. That finally turned the little monsters into a steady supply. He broke off a strip of dried squig and chewed. It was all umami and chew, somewhere between squid jerky and the beef jerky he remembered from his old life, getting more fragrant with each bite. Sometimes he had fatso stir-fry fresh squig with red mushrooms. The sweetness of the mushroom and the tender squig made a perfect match. After 5,000 years of culinary culture in his memory, Shito's cooking was a cross-dimensional advantage in their medieval world. When they'd roasted the whole lamb, he'd overseen each step. Gut the belly, stuff it with chopped mushrooms and herbs, plaster it with yellow clay, and roast it until the mud cracked. The skin came out crisp and the meat stayed tender, oil running when torn. The smell had spread through the whole camp, and greenskins had mobbed the carcass, snatching pieces like animals. Even the few goblins who'd surrendered to them earlier were impressed and looked at him with a new kind of respect. He had just led them to victory over the Skaven, and now he made sure everyone ate well. The tribe's cohesion had strengthened. He moved to the window, pushing it open a crack to look down. Inside the palisade, the day's work had already started. Grots hustled with wood, short legs kicking dust as they ran to the build site. Goblin spearmen practiced stabs with iron spears in the clearing, shouting rhythmically. Rymuth led a handful of elite archers toward the forest for patrol. At the mushroom beds, Fatso and Skinny lifted burlap covers, inspecting the new crop and pulling weeds. The wind sliced through the gap, bone cold, but she too didn't care. Chewing the squig, he watched his tribe bustle below, felt the savory taste and a steadying calm. His mouth twitched into a smile. He tapped the system interface again. The 1,029 teeth left weren't an enormous sum, but with 1 or 2 more successful raids, they'd make it through the winter. In spring, he'd upgrade the mushroom beds to level 2, and the extra grots and goblins those beds generated would boost the tribe's numbers. Then, whether to raid dwarves or cause trouble for other greenskin bands, they'd have more confidence. Things will get better, he thought, tearing off another piece of dried squig. Outside, the wind still howled, but sunlight was breaking through the clouds, painting the snow-covered encampment with a faint, golden light. The last taste of squig jerky faded from his mouth. Stone brushed the crumbs from his hands and looked toward the corner of the wooden hut, where several polished stone blocks and a bundle of dry planks were stacked, materials the Peejing sappers had prepared yesterday. He stood up and called toward the entrance. "Scarface!" Scarface barreled in seconds later with 4 burly Peejing laborers. They carried stone hammers and wooden saws, small bags of lime powder slung on their backs, clearly waiting for orders. "Boss, we're ready," Scarface said, his voice buzzing with excitement. Now a small leader among the Gretchen, he loved doing big things with Stone. "Come on, follow me. East corner of the tribe," Stone said, leading them out. Snowflakes stung his face in the cold wind, but he didn't mind. The eastern corner was usually deserted, scattered with a few withered trees, perfect for the important structure he'd been thinking about. He knelt and drew a rectangular frame in the snow with a stick. "Build it this size. First lay the stone blocks for the foundation, then use the planks for walls, height up to my waist." He gestured as he spoke. He remembered the simple, practical latrines from the countryside in his past life. The design was basic, but suited the greenskin tribe perfectly. The Peejing laborers didn't know exactly what he was building, but they listened intently. Scarface sent 2 Gretchen to move the stone blocks into place and tamp them flat with hammers. The other 2 sawed planks to length as Stone specified. Lime powder mixed with snow water made a crude mortar to bind wood and stone. It was rough but solid. Stone crouched nearby, making small adjustments, closing gaps between planks to keep drafts out, leveling the foundation so the structure wouldn't tilt. He also had them divide the interior into 2 small compartments with a plank. Greenskins usually didn't care about privacy, but a little separation would make them more willing to use it. About an hour later, they finished. A simple, tidy latrine. Bluish-gray stone blocks formed the foundation, light brown planks the walls, and a thatched roof sat on top. It wasn't as fine as the wooden huts, but it had a distinct purpose. Behind it, Stone had the Gretchen dig a half-meter pit, cover it with planks, and leave a single opening. This was the latrine's core. "This thing's called a latrine. From now on, you all poop here," Stone announced, patting the wood. Greenskins gathered, watching the commotion with puzzled faces. Since Stone arrived, the tribe had taken to bathing. Every evening, the hot spring pool by the fence filled with greenskins scrubbing with soap pods. The stench that used to hang over the tribe had already faded, but the habit of relieving themselves anywhere remained. You could still find greenskins taking care of business by huts, by the fence, around the mushroom field. Stone himself had stepped on a few landmines. Once he'd taken 2 steps out of his hut and felt something sticky underfoot. Another time, he nearly tripped over an unidentified object left by the goblin lads by a tree. The tribe did have dung carriers. The Gretchen collected excretions and heaped them at the edge of the tribe. Then they were left to dry or be washed away by rain, dirty, smelly piles that bred flies. "Why do we have to poop here? I'm fine by a tree," a goblin lad objected, scratching his head. Stone had expected that. He cleared his throat and raised his voice, deliberately loud, "Because Gork and Mork like clean greenskins. Whoever uses the latrine will be blessed by Gork and Mork, better at fighting, stronger in battle." The crowd exploded. Since Stone had evolved into a goblin, led them to defeat the Ratmen, and help many greenskins evolve into elites, the belief that Stone is Gork and Mork's chosen had taken root. Anything he said sounded like the gods' will. If he told them to charge the dwarves, they'd rush. "I want to go. I want Gork and Mork to bless me." One goblin shoved the door open and squeezed inside. "I'm going too. I'm cleaner than him," another pushed after him. "Don't push. There's enough for everyone. Gork and Mork will bless all of us." The crowd crowded, jostling and shouting. Their indifference flipped to eager showmanship. Stone watched, secretly pleased. 300 greenskins lived in the tribe now. 1 latrine wouldn't be enough. He'd have the Gretchen build more in the west and north in a few days. Then the whole tribe could stop relieving themselves wherever they pleased. A pale green curtain of light bloomed before his eyes, and a system chime rang out. "Congratulations, host, for independently creating a building. Building template is being generated. Building name, latrine. Function, produces 1 ton of greenskin fertilizer per month. After use, mushroom field growth rate increases by 17%. Maintenance requirements, Gretchen 15, responsible for cleaning and maintenance." Stone froze, then burst into a grin. He'd built the latrine to improve sanitation. He hadn't expected fertilizer. It was winter. While the mushroom field still yielded, growth slowed with the season. A 17% monthly boost meant field output wouldn't fall and might even rise. More food and storage meant the tribe could feed more mouths, a huge benefit. "This is a steal," Stone said, patting the planks. 15 Gretchen for maintenance was a small price for steady fertilizer. He pictured fat, plump mushrooms, greenskins eating their fill, working harder and fighting better. The greenskins outside still argued over who'd use the latrine next, and the Peejing laborers, under Scarface's direction, cleared the snow around it, preparing for the upkeep. Stone stood and let the scene play out, but his mind kept racing. Building a latrine was a small experiment. If the system recognized independently created buildings, what else could he produce? His gaze swept to the statue of Gork and Mork in the tribe center, then to the lumberyard and quarry in the distance. The system's earlier upgrade options included a larger lumberyard, a larger quarry, and a great statue of Gork and Mork that could train shamans. Resources were limited, but with careful planning and with fertilizer boosting food production, materials for upgrades wouldn't be far off. Next, a big project, Stone murmured, a bright edge in his green eyes. First, he'd focus resources to upgrade the mushroom field for steadier food, then the lumber yard and quarry to increase wood and stone output. Finally, he'd upgrade the statue to unlock shaman training. Once those were done, the Blackrock tribe could grow from a small village into a large one. Then he could consider claiming secondary territories and planting the tribe's flag across the howling forest. The cold wind still howled, but it couldn't blow out the warmth in Stone's chest. 45. The clarion call of construction. The howling wind drove heavy snow into every corner of the howling forest, casting the world in white. But inside the Blackrock tribe, there was no sign of winter slackening. Instead, the place thrummed with activity. The greenskins wore thick hides, waded through ankle-deep drifts, and hurried back and forth hauling logs and pushing stone carts. Pidging laborers gripped chisels and swung wooden hammers at the construction sites, humming off-key work songs. Even the laziest goblin lads, normally slack and whiny, were dragged to the quarry by Big Valley, who hauled them by the ear to make sure none of them dared loaf. Since the latrine was finished, She-Tone had set a new goal: upgrade every structure in the tribe. For more than a month, even as snow fell, the building never stopped. She-To divided the work into sections. He took personal charge of upgrading the statue of Brother Mao-Er, handed the lumberyard and quarry to Big Valley, and paired Scarface with Crooked Mouth to run the mushroom beds. Each foreman received a literal death warrant. Fail, and you'd get a proper beating. She-Tu was most invested in the statue. What had once been a crude pile of rubble was now fenced off and the tribe's focal project. Every day before dawn, he brought a dozen Pijing sappers to work the stone. First, they leveled the old statue with chisels, then the laborers set the newly carved bluestone slabs one by one. These slabs were the best from the quarry. Each was polished 3 times until it fit perfectly. "Half an inch to the left! Yes, just like that!" She-To squatted beside the statue, directing with a wooden stick. The sappers edged slabs into place and packed lime mortar into the seams, terrified of cracking a piece. The heads were the focus. She-To had 2 larger heads carved from solid bluestone and deliberately had rows of sharp tusks etched in. They weren't refined, but they were far more intimidating than before. The most important work was at the base. She-To had Squigs bury several iron scraps salvaged from the Skaven inside, placed according to the system's indicated positions. He claimed the bits would help gather Wog energy. Every evening when the work stopped, She-To walked the statue twice, touching the new slabs and calculating in his head. Once the statue was done, they could train shamans and add another source of fighting strength to the tribe. Big Valley was sweating bullets at the lumberyard. Upgrading the yard meant tripling the size of the shed and building 2 timber warehouses. Even in a bearskin coat, his collar was damp with sweat. He cracked a whip at lazy goblins. "Move it. Carry that now. If you don't finish stacking this pile before dark, I'll make all of you haul shit." 20 goblins took turns hewing trees with stone axes. Where it had once taken 2 to fell a large tree in half a day, the new iron axes, forged from Skaven scrap, let a single goblin fell 1 in 30 minutes. The logs were split, sorted, and carted to the warehouse by Pijing laborers hauling newly built wooden carts. The carts, made by the sappers, carried twice as much as before and doubled efficiency. The quarry was louder still. Big Valley had posted 30 goblins there to pry out new layers of bluestone with iron chisels and stone hammers. To speed the work, sappers made simple levers to lift slabs. "Watch your feet! Don't let the stones fall!" Big Valley barked from the pit edge, grinning as bluish slabs were hauled out. Those stones would upgrade not only the quarry's shed, but also the boss's house and the mushroom beds. No mistakes were allowed. Scarface and Crooked Mouth made a smooth team at the mushroom field. Scarface led the laborers in building a new burlap shelter. The level 2 beds needed thicker cover against the cold, so they stitched 2 layers of burlap together and ringed the shed with a circle of dry grass to block the wind. Crooked Mouth managed the greenskin fertilizer. Every morning, he took 5 Gretchen and carefully scattered the precious muck they'd collected from the latrine across the beds, measuring so nothing was wasted. The boss said this stuff's precious. Too much burns the sprouts, too little does nothing, he grumbled, pinching a bit between his fingers to judge the spread. Under their care, the new mushrooms grew fast. Their caps were larger and richer in color. Chubby practically grinned every time he came to harvest. The whole tribe had become one great building site. Greenskins moved through snow and mud without complaint. They knew upgraded structures meant more strength, more meat, and tougher bodies. Wooden poles beside the sites were strung with skaven heads and bones from the last battle. Some heads had holes chiseled in them and were impaled on poles, swaying in the wind. They doubled as trophies and warnings to any who might come sniffing. Shito circled the site several times a day, checking slabs on the statue, inspecting timber at the lumberyard, and watching the mushroom beds. When problems cropped up, he stopped to sort them. When a rock layer at the quarry proved too hard, he had the sappers drive iron wedges to split it. When cart numbers fell short, he drew blueprints and had the sappers work overtime to build more. That afternoon, after he finished inspecting Brother Maurer's statue, Chubby pulled him toward the livestock pens. Over a dozen goats and dozens of chickens were kept there, the tribe's vital meat supply. Chubby and Skinny Pole crouched by the fence, worried. 2 goats hadn't been eating and had wasted away. "Boss, look! What's wrong with these goats? If this keeps up, they'll starve." Chubby stamped his feet. Shito examined the goats. Their ears were a little hot. "They're cold," he said, frowning. "Lay thicker dry grass inside the pen and make a bigger fire at night. Boil them mushroom soup every day to help them recover." He grew stern. "Those goats and chickens are treasures. If even one goes missing, I'll twist your heads off and use them as balls." Chubby and Skinny Pole nodded frantically. "Got it, boss. We'll watch them. Not a single one will go missing." "Don't worry, I'll give you support," Shito softened. "Tomorrow, have the sappers make 2 new wooden troughs for water and feed. If you need dry grass, take it from the lumberyard. Don't be stingy." Relieved, Chubby and Skinny Pole rushed off to lay down grass and repair the shelter. Shito stayed by the pens a moment longer, watching the distant building sites and the goats pacing contentedly. Snow still fell, but the tribe's energy hadn't waned. He knew the statue, the lumberyard, the quarry, and the mushroom beds would soon be fully upgraded. The Blackrock tribe was about to take a big leap. Snow whipped pellets against his face, but Shito smiled. This winter would not be a peaceful one. 46. Thatched Hut. The morning sunlight finally pierced the endless wind and snow, scattering pale patches of light across the lattice of the boss's wooden house. Shito sat up on the plank bed, covered with thick goat hides, rubbing his throbbing temples. Last night he'd been up late with Big Valley and Crooked Mouth, hashing out housing plans, and his head still buzzed with numbers: wood, thatch huts, population growth. He grabbed a strip of dried squig meat from the bedside, chewed as he walked to the window, pushed open the wooden shutter, and looked down over the whole tribe. The scene was night and day different from a month ago. A massive statue of Gork and Mork rose in the center of the settlement, its bluestone pedestal cold and gleaming. The tusks on its head were sharpened, and a string of Ratman skulls hung around its neck, swaying in the breeze. The lumberyard's shed had been expanded threefold, roofed with thick thatch and stacked with lumber piled half a person high outside the entrance. The quarry had been dug several feet deeper. Newly hewn bluestone slabs lay neatly stacked, their surfaces moist. Most striking was the large mushroom field, more than a dozen burlap sheds linked together, faint steam drifting from their roofs, the silhouettes of Ping laborers moving inside. Finally, the basic structures are done, Shito said, a small smile tugging at his mouth as he chewed the squig meat. He could still hear the system prompt from last night in his head. "Congratulations, host, on completing all basic building upgrades. Blackrock Tribe has officially upgraded to a level 2 village, meaning the tribe had shed its small village rudiments and gained a foundation for larger development." He opened the system panel and read the territory data. Category: Greenskin Level 2 Village. Population: 673. Goblins 100 Gretchen. Obedience: 102 Normal. Resources: Teeth 1087, wood 132, stone 119, iron X constructed, boss's wooden house, large mushroom field, lumber yard, warboss statue, second brother idol stone, latrine, goblin training grounds, spearman camp, archer's camp. Available for construction, watchtower, tavern, fighting pit, squig pen, junkyard, tusk hut, hunting grounds, mine, recruitable, Gretchen, goblins. Assessment, a greenskin tribe favored by Gork and Mork. Growth had been astonishing, nearly 200 people in 1 month, far more than Shito expected. Over the past 3 weeks, the mushroom field had steadily produced 10 Gretchen lads and 3 goblin lads each week, 30 Gretchen and 9 goblins for the month. Though goblin output was low, it was the tribe's first reliable source of homegrown fighters. No longer forced to depend solely on raids or captures, they could begin to accumulate a core military force. What surprised him most was the jump in goblin proportion, from an initial 2% up to 18%. Besides the produced goblin lads and a handful of captured goblins, the epic victory over the Ratman tribe had earned 87 reputation points and drawn 20 wandering goblins to join. Most of these newcomers had combat experience, some with stone axes, others with bows. With minimal training, they could join the spearmen or archers. Now the Blackrock tribe could boast 45 elite spearmen and 38 elite archers, and more than 40 other combat-capable goblin lads. Shito was confident he could beat any greenskin tribe of comparable size without outside help. But the triumph revealed a new problem. On the open ground west of the tribe, dozens of Gretchen were crammed into tatty tents. Some tents gaped with large holes, letting the cold wind and snow inside, so the Gretchen huddled and shivered. Some goblins had simply set up makeshift thatched shelters outside the wooden houses, relying on bonfires to stay warm at night. The population boom had made the tents and old houses completely inadequate. The winter wind was sharpening, and if the greenskins kept freezing, they'd get sick, and morale would suffer. We need to build new housing fast. Shito closed the panel, shoved the last piece of squig meat into his mouth, and hurried down the stairs. He summoned Big Valley, Crooked Mouth, and Scarface and laid out his plan to build greenskin thatch huts. The huts must be sturdy, wind and rainproof, he said. Each hut should hold 2 goblins or 20 Gretchen and raise obedience by 3 points. Only when they're comfortable will they work properly for me. Crooked Mouth scratched his head. Boss, how much wood does a hut take? The lumberyard's a proper mill now, but that heavy snow's slowed collection. 10 units of wood per hut, 3 days to build, Shito answered. He'd already done the math. We'll tear down the old tents first and salvage the wood for the bases. Draw the rest from the lumberyard if needed. Scarface, take all the pigeon laborers and make hut construction the top priority. Put everything else on hold. Scarface straightened. Got it, boss. We'll get it done quick. The pigeon laborers worked far more efficiently than anyone had expected. These evolved laborers were sturdier and more obedient than ordinary Gretchen. 10 of them could do the work of 30 goblin slaves. They started by using stone axes to dismantle the old tents, sorting the reusable wood. Then, following Shito's blueprints, they built hut frames from new lumber, thick logs for uprights, smaller logs for crossbeams, then plastered gaps with thatch mixed with yellow clay to keep out cold and rain. Big Valley supervised wood allocation, making sure enough lumber was hauled from the yard every morning so no site ran dry. Crooked Mouth led several goblin lads to inspect hut quality, ordering repairs to any insufficient thatch work. As huts rose one by one, the greenskins watched with hope, no more sleeping in leaky tents or shivering through the night. A month later, 49 thatch huts stood in neat rows on the tribe's north and west sides, their bluish-gray roofs glowing softly in sunlight. Squigs moved in first. 20 Gretchen crowded into each room, tight but warm. Goblins got 2 per room, with space left for a simple wooden bed and chest, vastly more comfortable than before. At night, bonfires burned inside the huts, and the greenskins' laughter echoed through the settlement, bringing an unmistakable coziness. But Shito's brow still furrowed. He checked the system panel and glanced at the wood inventory. Current wood stock, 17 units. Daily output, 10 units. Lumberyard production. Daily consumption, 8 units. Routine maintenance, remaining hut construction. The upgraded lumberyard and 50 goblin slaves could now produce 10 units of wood a day, a big improvement. But building 49 huts had eaten the saved reserves. Winter storms still sometimes halted operations, and the wood stock remained precariously low. More worrying was the blocked path to higher-tier buildings. The shaman hut required 200 wood, 150 stone, and 10 iron plates. The blacksmith shop demanded 300 wood, 250 stone, and 50 iron plates. They didn't have enough wood or stone yet, let alone iron. Shito stood by the lumber yard and watched goblin slaves hauling wood into the cold, turning over plans in his head. With winter still in full force, wood collection couldn't be ramped up quickly. All he could do was ensure daily maintenance and finish the remaining huts. The shaman hut and blacksmith shop would have to wait until spring, when warmer weather would let the lumber yard and quarry run at full capacity and materials could be accumulated. Slow and steady, Shito told a wooden pillar, looking out at the great statue of Gork and Mork in the tribe center. Despite the wood and housing problems, the tribe had become a level 2 village with stable troop sources and production. Keep the pace, and the problems would be solved. The sun climbed higher, chasing away the last chill. Greenskins lit bonfires beside the huts, roasting mushrooms and dried meat, laughter drifting across the settlement as the tribe settled into its new winter life. 47. Green Slave Team. Morning dew still clung to the burlap awning over the mushroom field, scattering the light. Stone stood beneath it with his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the soft humus underfoot and smiling. Today the big mushroom patch would birth new greenskins, and watching life push up from the dirt made him feel steadier than any victory in battle. The humus shifted, first swelling into a small mound, then splitting open. A round head poked out. A Gretchen. Sticky mycelium clung to its gray-green skin like a layer of clear glue. Its bean-sized eyes were half-lidded and misty, but instinct made it arch its round belly and push upward. Its tiny limbs kicked at the soil. Flecks of earth stuck to its skin like crushed coal, making it look clumsy and ridiculous. Half out of the ground, the Gretchen froze, its belly bulged, and with a soft poof, it sprayed a cloud of yellow-green mist from its rear. The mist smelled faintly of spores. It drifted over the mycelia around it, which instantly curled as if scalded. Stone laughed. This was the Gretchen's birthright, the mark that set them apart from other greenskins. It never failed to amuse him. Afterward, the newborn seemed relieved. It shook its head and began to work tiny claws over its body to scrape off the dirt, pausing every so often to nibble on a small mushroom with obvious satisfaction. A moment later, the giant cap beside it shuddered. This cap was 3 times larger than the surrounding fungi, its gills dark and dense. Within, black spores swarmed and condensed, forming a vague humanoid shape. With a crack, the spore shell burst in the humid air, revealing thin limbs. A goblin. This goblin was quick to show it wasn't helpless. Its claws found the gill edge, and it climbed like a monkey, scrabbling up to squat on the cap in seconds. It flicked the spore dust from its head, its small, alert eyes darting around, scanning. Cunning and vigilance marked its gaze. Before Stone could react, it had torn away the mycelial wrapping at its waist, and with quick, practiced fingers, braided a crude rope, swinging it experimentally. As expected of a goblin, born to tinker, Stone thought. Survival instincts were in their bones. Goblins learned to scavenge and make use of things far earlier than Gretchen, which is why goblins often became the tribe's fighters and tinkerers, while Gretchen handled chores. The newly born Gretchen smelled the goblin's spores and gurgled happily, hopping over to tug at the goblin's hem. The goblin scuffed it off with a disgusted boot, sending the small thing spinning. The Gretchen only laughed, dusted itself off, and returned to rub its round belly against the goblin's ankle, collecting handfuls of spore dust it had just sprayed and piling them at the goblin's feet as if offering a treasure. Stone watched, warmth spreading through him. The greenskin's symbiosis showed itself from the instant they emerged. Goblins to make and fight, Gretchen to follow and serve. He stepped forward, patted the goblin's head with his rough palm, then gently ruffled the Gretchen's belly so as not to hurt it. "Grow up big and strong," he said, smiling. "Come with me to battle someday, and you'll have meat to eat." The goblin blinked and offered the rope to Stone like a pledge. The Gretchen gurgled and rubbed itself closer to Stone's foot. The moment was soft and proud until hurried footsteps came from the trail. Stone looked up as a goblin scout barreled toward them, beast-hide armor askew, hat missing, face full of panic. "Boss! Boss! Something's happened! Outside! There are humans! Lots of humans!" Along the Howling Trail, at the edge of the Howling Forest, a contingent of roughly 100 marched slowly forward. Hooves plowed the melting mud, sending brown slush flying. Above them, dozens of black banners with eagle-head crests fluttered, the eagle's eyes stitched in gold thread glinting in the sun. The formation was well-balanced. Spear-bearing infantry in front, their iron-tipped spears flashing. Archers lining the flanks with quivers bulging and fingers on bowstrings. And in the center, over a dozen prison carts creaked and groaned as their wheels turned. Inside those carts were tall orcs, over 2 meters on average, bound in iron chains but still hulking and muscled. Their green skin was scarred from battle. Red eyes glared out between the bars, low growls rumbling from their throats as they fixed their stares on the humans. At the head rode a middle-aged man in silver-heavy armor on a black warhorse. Blonde hair and blue eyes framed a neatly trimmed full beard. Complex flourishes were etched across his breastplate, and the eagle crest on his chest matched the banners. He held his reins loosely, looking relaxed and even fussing with his collar from time to time, not from negligence, but from confidence. In his view, there was nothing in this forest to fear. "My lord," a cavalryman rode up and reported softly, "this is the edge of the Howling Forest. As you ordered, we've slowed our pace." The commander inclined his head, arrogance in his tone. "No need to hurry. The dwarves cleared this forest years ago when they opened the trade routes. They uprooted the greenskin tribes. There aren't even any decent greenskins left. These orcs will fetch a good price in Catastrophe." He was right about the contingent's purpose. This was a slaver squad from Prince Patton's fiefdom, a unit specialized in rounding up greenskins from forest fringes and hauling them to Catastrophe's slave markets. Orcs were prized for their size and endurance, used as miners in the depths, thrown into battle as expendable shock troops, or forced into gladiatorial entertainments. It was profitable and politically useful. Money in the nobles' slave coffers and fewer enemies in the wilds. The soldiers were at ease. Some hummed, some joked, others sneered at the captive orcs. A young infantryman jabbed an orc's arm with his spear. "Hey, big guy, quit glaring. Catastrophe'll be a good time for you." The orc lunged at the bars with a roar, iron chains holding it tight. Fury flashed in its eyes as the humans taunted it. The commander glanced at the carts with a cold sneer. To him, these greenskins were beasts to be controlled, keep them chained and well guarded, and they were worth money. He looked up at the clear sky. The sun was bright and the road fair. At this pace, they'd be in Catastrophe in 3 days. These orcs would soon be coin. What he didn't notice were pairs of small, watchful eyes peering from the trees along the road. Goblin scouts of the Blackrock tribe hid in the shadows, spears clutched tight, watching the slaver contingent with sharp vigilance. They knew they had to get word of this back to their tribe and to their boss, Stone. 48. Green Slave 2. On the western cliff of the Howling Forest, the wind came in hard, driving withered grass against the soldier's beast-hide armor with a dry crackle. He crouched halfway on the cliff edge, one hand resting on the iron axe at his waist, his gaze like an eagle's fixed on the column moving along the winding road below. 100-man slaver squad picked its way along the path, its black banner with an eagle head motif, a dull patch in the dimming light, fluttering in the breeze. Behind the soldier, more than 100 goblin spearmen and archers fanned out, iron spear tips and polished wooden arrows catching the last of the sun. Each goblin wore that cunning, savage look, beady eyes glued to the humans below, chattering in quick, excited voices and prodding one another with spear shafts. Some had already knocked arrows, points aimed at the riders, waiting for their leader's command. "All of you, shut up!" The soldier turned and barked, his voice low and gravelly, but carrying unmistakable authority. The goblins fell silent at once. They all knew their boss hated noise when he was planning. He refocused on the slaver squad, scanning the soldiers' gear with a narrowing brow. The front rank wore chainmail with feathers in their helmets, Archers at the flanks carried well-made horn bows and oil-darkened shafts. The cavalry in the center rode tall, well-bred war horses and were plated in heavy armor. At the head of the column rode a blond, middle-aged man whose breastplate was carved with intricate designs and bore a larger, brighter eagle emblem, clearly the squad's commander. Not the kind of private force an ordinary noble could afford, the soldier thought. Chainmail, horn bows, heavy cavalry, this looked like the retinue of at least an earl. With only their 100-odd goblins, a head-on charge would be suicide. Human discipline was too good. Spearmen in formation, archers firing volleys, cavalry charges. These goblins wouldn't last long under that kind of coordinated response. He scanned the terrain below. The road was hemmed in by dense woods, the area flat, with no ravines or rocks to use for an ambush. If the human leader had chosen this route with prisoner carts, they had likely scouted it first. Any good ambush spots would already be taken by them. A frontal fight would be a disaster. Then his eyes landed on the prisoner carts in the middle of the column, heavy wooden boxes reinforced with iron bands and chained wheels. He counted 18 carts, 10 to 15 prisoners in each. They were orcs. Even bound in chains, their bulk was obvious. Some stood twice the height of a goblin, their arms thick with rippling muscle. A plan exploded into the soldier's mind. Free those orcs. If the orcs were released, orcs captured and subdued by the humans, the sudden freedom and rage would make them savage fighters against their captors. The Blackrock tribe had no orcs of their own, only goblins and Gretchen. Taking in a batch of battle-hardened orcs could turn the tribe's strength up a notch. The slaver squad wasn't huge. With the right trick, they had a chance. Hard fights were their lot, but ceaseless caution had kept them alive. This was risky, but worth it. He glanced at the sky. The sun had already dropped behind the mountains. Night was slipping from the forest edges toward the road. In half an hour, the path would be black. Perfect. "Listen up," he said, standing and turning to the goblins behind him, his voice tight with barely contained excitement. "We'll circle around into the woods behind that slaver squad. Keep quiet. Don't give us away. We won't fight the humans head-on. We free the orcs from those carts." At first, the goblins were stunned, then their faces lit with a fanatical gleam. Free the orcs and let them smash the humans. Brilliant. They raised spears and bows, low, eager cries rippling through the ranks. "Crooked Mouth," the soldier called. "I'm here." Crooked Mouth slipped forward, bow in hand. "You take 20 archers, move to the woods in front of the squad," the soldier ordered. "When I give the signal, shoot arrows into the air to draw their eyes." "Got it." Crooked Mouth grinned and signaled his men, dropping into the undergrowth. "Big Valley," the soldier barked next. "Boss," Big Valley answered, hefting his iron-bound stone spear. "You and 50 spearmen come with me to the rear of the convoy. When Crooked Mouth fires, we charge and smash the locks on the carts. The rest of the archers will follow Scarface and provide covering fire. Don't let the human archers catch us from the side." "Understood." Big Valley and Scarface answered together, faces bright with anticipation. Below the cliff, the slaver squad continued, oblivious. The blonde commander rode with his cavalry, laughing and swapping plans about spending the gold they'd get for the orcs back in Katushir. Hooves, laughter, and the creak of carts blended strangely loud in the hush of dusk. The chained orcs inside the carts thudded and growled, forcing their bulk against the wood to no avail. "Go." The soldier raised his axe and led the way into the woods. Over 100 goblins slipped after him like shadows, vanishing into the night-dimmed trees. Their steps were light on rotting leaves, weapons held silent and ready. These goblins were born ambushers. In a forest, they were like stalking wolves, patient and relentless. The slaver squad drew nearer. The smell of human sweat and horse manure grew stronger, and the orcs' low, mounting snarls seeped from the carts. The soldier tightened his grip on the axe until his knuckles went white. The show he had arranged was about to start. The last snows of winter had long since melted, and the howling trail was nothing but mud. Hooves and boot soles sloshed through the mire, leaving prints of every size. As twilight bled out behind the trees, the slaver squad finally halted and began to make camp in a lazy, disordered way. Cavalrymen dismounted and flung their reins to the infantry behind them, grumbling, "This rotten road will wear the horses' hooves down." Spearmen with long pikes set up tent frames slowly. Others simply sat in the mud and pulled out dry rations, abandoning the rigid formations they'd kept on the march. Ha-B, leader of the squad, reined in his warhorse and frowned at the chaos, but said nothing. The long march had tired him, and the dwarves had long ago cleared this stretch of forest. No greenskins had been seen for days, so strict vigilance felt unnecessary. He dismounted, while two infantrymen hurried over to help strip off his silvered heavy armor. Mud streaked the engraved plates, but the craftsmanship still flashed in the dying light. "Sir, your tent is ready," a servant said respectfully, pointing to a brown tent twice the size of the others. A small black pennant bearing an eagle's head hung above the entrance. Hobby nodded. Without the heavy plates, he looked leaner, though a black inner cuirass still hugged his torso. Years in the field had taught him never to let his guard drop entirely. He took the water skin the servant offered, twisted the cap, and drank. The cold water eased some of the fatigue. "Tell the men guarding the prisoner carts to keep a close eye on those greenskins," he said, leaning against the tent post with a lazy edge to his voice. "Don't let them cause trouble. We move early tomorrow. If anything goes wrong tonight, I'll skin them alive." "Yes, sir." The servant darted off. Hobby went inside. Thick wool blankets covered a folding camp bed. A small wooden box in the corner held a change of clothes and rations. He set his helmet on the box, lay on the bed, and closed his eyes. The march had already drugged him into sleep. His hand fell to the short sword by his pillow, a habit of years on campaign. Outside, the men posted around the prisoner carts were less content. 3 soldiers squatted by one cart, their spears resting against the wood. One took a pull from his wineskin and muttered, "Why does Lord Habby sleep snug in a tent while we stand out here, freezing and watching these stinking greenskins?" "Shut up," another said. He kept glancing at the orcs inside the cart. Their red eyes shone like coals in the dim light, and his heart thudded. "Get through tonight. Tomorrow we get to Katushir, collect pay, and then we'll hit the taverns." The third soldier didn't answer. He kicked the cart's planks in irritation. The dull clang made the orcs inside snarl and rush the bars, chains clanking. They bared teeth and let out low growls, but the locks held. The human sentries, distracted by talk and the rattle of camp cores, paid no heed to the forest around them. They failed to notice dozens of small shapes slipping through the brush. Goblins, no taller than a meter, moved like shadows through the fallen leaves. The rustle of their feet was lost beneath the cart's creak, and the soldiers' chatter. In their hands, they carried stone axes, jagged bone daggers, short spears. Their beady green eyes glittered, fixed on the camp's perimeter. By the east edge of the camp, 2 sentries were dozing, backs against tree trunks, crossbows slung across their shoulders, helmets crooked. 3 hunched goblins crept toward them. One pounced, clamping a burlap gag over a sentry's mouth, while another thrust a bone dagger into the exposed gap of his chainmail. The man's eyes bulged. He thrashed, but the goblins held him down. The blade was driven again and again until the soldier slumped. Silent hands dragged the body into the trees, leaving no alarm, only the stillness of a body taken away. It happened all around. Quick, efficient teams worked, some to silence mouths, some to kill, others to collect dropped crossbows. In the space of an incense stick, the 6 sentries that had ringed the camp were removed without a sound. Only a few bodies lay hidden deep in the forest where the goblins had dragged them. Crooked Mouth led 20 goblin archers up into the large trees that ringed the camp. They perched on thick branches, cloaked by foliage, bows already strung and arrows notched, aim trained on the camp's center. Below, Stone had over 50 spearmen waiting in the thicket to the west. He scanned the camp and counted 18 prisoner carts parked in the middle of the site, guarded by only 4 men. The rest of the soldiers were asleep in tents or clustered around the fire. He checked the sky, moon high, silver and hazy. Perfect time. "Big Valley, Scarface's side ready?" Stone asked softly. The scout beside him nodded. "Boss, Big Valley and Scarface have taken 30 archers to the southeast high ground. They're waiting." Stone smiled thinly. The southeast rise commanded a view of the entire camp. Archers there could suppress human archers and step in where needed. He gripped the iron axe at his hip. Around the camp, human soldiers finished settling in, yawning and lining up gear for the night. In one of the carts, the orcs growled, red eyes like tiny flames. Habis slept behind his tent flap, unaware that the conspiracy had already sprung into motion. Stone raised a hand and signaled Crooked Mouth. Crooked Mouth understood. He crouched, then yelled up into the night, "Shoot!" Arrows hissed. 20 shafts flashed silver in the moonlight and thudded into the open space at the camp's center, splashing mud. Men sprang up from tents, startled and cursing. "Who's there? Enemy! Arms! To your posts!" Confused shouts filled the clearing. Soldiers grabbed for weapons, stumbling, trying to find the source. The men at the fire leapt up, throwing rations aside. Stone's eyes lit with ferocity. He rose, axe raised, and barked, "Charge! Smash the carts!" Over 50 goblin spearmen exploded from the bushes like a pack of wolves, racing for the prisoner carts in the center. Their stone-tipped spears and iron axes gleamed as they closed in on the few men left guarding the prisoners. From the southeast high ground, Big Valley and Scarface loosed 30 arrows toward the human archers on the east side. Men who had just grabbed bows were hit before they could aim, dropping with screams that cut through the night. 50. Green Slave, Slave Team 4. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Goblin archers hidden in the trees rained iron shafts down into the camp. The arrows sliced through the night and found flesh. One infantryman, who stumbled from his tent, had an arrow thrust through his throat, clutched at it as blood gushed between his fingers, then collapsed into the mud. A cavalryman, swinging into his saddle, felt an arrow graze his cheek and bury itself in his horse's flank. The warhorse screamed, reared, and dumped its rider into the muck. The slaver squad still had many elites. On the north side of the camp, a stubbled archer had just dodged a volley when he looked up and saw a green silhouette flash among the moonlit leaves. "Green skins in the trees!" he roared, snatched the hornbow at his side, knocked an arrow, and fired into the densest part of the canopy. His shaft thunked into a branch and startled the goblin perched there. It nearly fell out. "Why are there green skins here? Weren't they all cleared out?" one soldier swore. "Damn those mushroom eaters! Shoot them dead!" another barked. "We shouldn't have trusted the dwarves," came a third. A dozen elite human archers reacted instantly, raising their bows to pour return fire into the trees. Arrows shrieked upward. Some pierced leaves, some clipped goblin ears, forcing the little creatures to pull their bodies in tight. But the goblins held the height advantage. Sitting on branches and firing down, they could easily pick targets across the camp, while human archers, shooting up through the canopy, suffered poor aim. "Don't let them look up," Crooked Mouth hissed from a crotch in the tree, dodging shafts. He knocked his own arrow, aimed for a human archer, raising his bow, and loosed. The shaft whooshed and buried itself in the man's wrist. He screamed as his hornbow clattered to the ground and blood soaked his sleeve. The goblins cheered, but Crooked Mouth had been aiming for the head. Their archers adjusted, aiming at arms and torsos to disable the human bowmen rather than kill outright. A few, more cunning, shot for the horses in the center of camp. "Shoot the horses! Drive them mad!" one goblin squealed. An arrow slid into a horse's hindquarters, and the animal went berserk. "Warboss of straight fighting, protect us," another snickered. Then Warboss of trickery, protect me! Ha! Shoot the little ones. Warhorses panicked. They reared, snatched at reins, scattered through the camp, smashing bonfires and kicking down tents. Some stamped toward soldiers, hooves thudding on the muddy ground and driving the camp into chaos. "Charge! Smash the prisoner carts!" Stone snarled. He led over 50 spearmen into the camp from the west, iron axe in hand. The goblins howled and surged forward. One rushed a patrolling soldier, spear aimed at his chest. The soldier blocked with a long spear and booted the goblin into the mud. Another goblin slashed at the soldier's leg with a stone axe. The man staggered to his knees and was stabbed to death by spears that converged. The slaver squad's spearmen stabilized fast. 20 elite spearmen formed a bristling hedge of spear tips and met the goblin charge. Goblin shafts clanged off enemy spears. Instead of breaking the line, they were skewered on the points. One goblin was impaled by 3 spears at once, his body hanging on their tips like a rag, blood streaking down the shafts into the mud. "These humans can fight," Stone muttered, watching goblins fall. He brought his iron axe down on a soldier's spear. The blade struck the shaft and sent the man flying. The soldier kneed Stone in the gut, Stone answered with a backhanded swing to the man's shoulder. The blade severed flesh. Yet before Stone could finish the soldier, another thrust sliced across his own shoulder. Blood dyed his beast-hide armor. Both sides ground at each other in brutal attrition, goblins by ferocity, humans by discipline and superior gear. Each step forward cost goblin lives. "Support the boss," Big Valley roared from the high ground to the southeast. He reoriented his archers, and 30 arrows hissed into the soldiers' line. Most struck shafts and shields, but a few found gaps. One man took an arrow in the thigh and fell, immediately surrounded and gutted by 4 goblin spears. A small breach opened. "Now!" Stone's eyes flared. He ignored his shoulder wound and surged through. He invoked shaman magic, pain nullification. For a span, his pain vanished, and his strength rose by 10%. He gripped his iron axe and drove it into the soldier in the breach. The force numbed the man's arm, and the spear flew out of his hands. Stone kicked him back, then swung, cleaving through neck and bone. The breach burst open, and the goblins poured through like a tide. Spears and axes hacked and gored. One goblin knocked a helmet off with his spear tip, another cleaved skull and brain matter over the mud. The human defensive line collapsed. Soldiers fell back, some fleeing. The elite sheen was gone. "Stop right there! No retreat!" A roar came from the heart of the camp. Hobby lunged out, still in his black underarmor, hair unkempt, clutching a short sword. He'd been sleeping, but woke to the fighting and charged without his heavy armor. He stared at the scramble. The goblins were heading straight for the 18 prisoner carts. The chained orcs inside thudded their fists and teeth against the wood, red eyes blazing. "This is bad! They want the carts open." Hobby's face went white. "Stop them. Do not let any goblin near those carts. If anyone lets a cart get smashed, I'll skin him alive." Soldiers snapped to the order and lunged for the goblins. Brutal slaughter erupted. One soldier caught a goblin by the leg, slammed it down, and drove his short sword through its throat. Another was hacked in the back and finished by converging spears. The mud filled with bodies, and a dark red trickle gathered around the carts. Stone cut toward the first cart at the head of the charge, wounded. A deep gash across his left arm exposed bone, blood slicking his axe handle. A spear had struck his chest but hit hide armor and spared his organs. Each swing tore at his wounds, but he kept moving. He'd cut down 3 soldiers and knocked over 2 spearmen. Raw flesh and blood smeared his axe. Inside the carts, the orcs woke. The 2-meter-tall captives, gaunt and sullen from captivity, exploded with fury at the sight of Stone. They roared, chains rattling, slamming their bulk against the wood. One giant ramed the plank with a cracking impact, and a splintering gap appeared. The goblin archers in the trees and on the ridge were losing their edge as more human elite bowmen arrived and rained volleys at their cover. One goblin archer fell shot from a branch and was trampled into the mud. Scarface on the high ground had an arrow in his shoulder, but gritted his teeth and kept directing fire. "If we don't open them now, the humans will regroup and will be wiped out," Stone thought. He raised his axe and cleaved a soldier's short sword in 2. The blade continued on and sheared the man's shoulder clean off. The soldier screamed and collapsed. Stone stepped over him and reached the first prisoner cart. The orcs inside clawed at the lock, hands stretched through the splintered gap. Stone stared at the heavy iron padlock that held the wooden planks together. He drew a deep breath, lifted his blood-slick axe, and brought it down hard on the iron lock. 51, Green Slave Team 5, clang! The iron axe struck the prison cart's lock with a heavy blow, sending sparks flying. Stone gritted his teeth as the wound in his shoulder tore open. The pain seared through him, but he swung again. The rusty lock finally gave with a crack. He shoved the wooden door of the cart open. It thudded against a nearby tree. "Quick, pry the chains!" Stone shouted. 4 goblins who had been crouched nearby rushed forward, crowbars in hand, and jammed them into the shackles binding the orcs. The iron twisted and screamed as the bars forced the links apart. Thick chains snapped with a metallic shriek. The first orc to be freed leaped out, 2 meters tall, green skin crisscrossed with old scars, red eyes burning with rage. His feet hit the muddy ground and the earth shook. "Wah!" He howled, snatched up a broken spear, and charged the nearest human soldier. The soldier barely had time to lift his own spear before the orc drove his through the man's chest. The corpse flew up and slammed down, mud splattering the faces of the surrounding troops. Other orcs broke free. Some grabbed abandoned battle axes, some hefted corpses as improvised weapons, and one ripped a wooden panel from the cart and swung it like a shield, smashing it into the crowd. "Smash open the rest of the carts," Stone barked, and the goblins spread out. Some used axes to chop locks, others pried doors with crowbars. Door after door of the 18 prison carts was forced open, and orcs poured into the camp. In 15 minutes, nearly 200 orcs flooded the battlefield like a burst dam. Roars, soldiers' screams, and the clanging of weapons blended into a single, horrible sound. The Slaver Squad soldiers had tried to form ranks under Hobby's command, but the orc charge turned the camp into chaos. A formed line of spearmen was split when an orc barreled through with a door. Archers firing from a ridge were tackled from behind and had their throats torn out. Mud mixed with chainmail, green flesh, and goblin hides. Blood stained every inch of ground, and the air tasted of iron. Hobby, short sword flashed, cut down 2 charging orc boys. He ran the first through the throat before it could close in. He sidestepped the second's axe and backhanded a slash across its belly, spilling entrails into the mud. Still his face grew grimmer by the second. The camp was dissolving into slaughter. Soldiers scrambled in disarray. Some fought desperately, some fled, others were surrounded and ripped apart. "This won't hold," Hobby barked at his personal guards. "Grab some war horses. Rally the scattered cavalry now." 2 of his guards dashed for the tethered mounts through a hail of arrows. Most horses were panicked, some wounded and thrashing, but the guards' horsemanship steadied 4 that were relatively calm. Hobby slashed his sword and galloped toward the eastern edge of the camp, where a handful of cavalry still held out. Their mounts were skittish, but had not run far. "All of you, with me!" Hobby shouted, felling an orc lunging at a cavalryman. The riders rallied, mounted, and charged with him. In under half an hour, 18 cavalrymen had gathered behind Hobby. Their horses panted, but their sabers gleamed cold in the moonlight. "Charge! Use the cavalry to break them," Hobby urged. He spurred his horse into the densest knot of orcs. Hooves thundered through the mud, throwing up waves of sludge. Sabers flashed. An orc didn't have time to react before a strike severed an arm. Blood sprayed across a horse's flank. Another raised an axe to counter, but a war horse slammed into him and sent him flying. The riders behind trampled him to a pulp. The 18 cavalrymen formed a wedge and cut a path through the crowd like a blade. Using their mobility, they alternated charges and flanking runs, their sabers reaping orcs continuously. One orc grabbed at a horse's leg and received a kick that shattered its face. Another swung a plank at a warhorse and was split in 2. The fallen plank and corpse hit the ground together. Even as they cut through the horde, more soldiers began to rally around the cavalry. Hobby bellowed, "Those who don't want to die, form ranks. Follow the cavalry." Scattered troops clung to that lifeline and closed in. Hobby kept the cavalry on the perimeter, while the rest formed an inward-facing ring of spearmen with their points outward, an improvised but disciplined defensive line. Against the odds, the makeshift force began to hold. The cavalry disrupted green skin formations. The spearmen held the center, stabbing down anyone who charged. A goblin who lifted a crude spear found himself skewered by a long spear. An orc attacking the flank had his neck sliced clean by a saber. Dozens of green-skinned corpses piled up, and blood ran in seams across the ground. Stone crouched behind a tree and watched, fists clenched with fury. His shoulder and chest bled, and only about 20 goblins remained at his side. The rest had been cut down, stabbed, or scattered. What infuriated him most was not the human skill, but the orcs' lack of discipline. Some chased individual soldiers, others fought among themselves for weapons. There was no coordinated command. If he could have directed the orcs, he would have flanked the cavalry, cut off their retreat, and used superior numbers to surround them. As it stood, the orcs were like headless flies, reckless, wasteful, and easy targets for the horses. Outside the camp, more goblins and orcs still pressed through the woods, scouts emerging from ambush and newly freed prisoners joining the throng. Poorly equipped but ferocious, they kept battering at the human line. One orc heaved a stone axe and snapped a spear in the spearman's ring. A cluster of goblin lads slunk into the formation's rear and hurled stones at soldiers' knees, Men fell and were instantly cut down from behind. Hobby watched his men tire. Gaps were opening in the spear ring, and some war horses were beginning to flag, panting, wounded, slowed by arrows. They had the edge now, but it was draining quickly. The greenskins came on like a tide. If the battle dragged on, the humans would be ground down. We have to break out, Hobby decided. He scanned for escape and eyed the eastern exit. The concentration of greenskins there was thinner. If they could fight through and head south along the Howling Trail, they might reach the borders of Prince Patton's fiefdom. He drew a breath, raised his saber, and called to the men behind him. Listen up. East exit is our target. Cavalry lead, spearmen cover the rear. Break out. The 18 cavalrymen swung around and charged for the eastern gap. Sabers bit, cutting down the green-skinned obstacles. The spearmen followed, planting their points into charging orcs and pushing the line forward. A few goblins rushed to block them, but were too few. One was cut in half by a saber. Another tried to stab a horse and had his throat impaled by a spear. The human force pushed steadily toward the east like a wedge. The greenskins launched desperate counterattacks, but could only watch the soldiers edge closer to the exit. Hobby glanced back at the camp, a churning sea of blood and struggling greenskins, and set his jaw. He urged his horse toward the opening. Break through, and they lived. Get bogged down, and death would be certain. One-on-one. One-on-one. Amid the chaotic din of battle, the human breakout force cut through the greenskin horde like a red-hot branding iron. Cavalry led the charge, sabers flashing. Any orc in their path was dismembered or hurled aside by the war horses. A phalanx of spearmen followed, their tightly packed spear tips impaling charging goblins one after another. Blood ran down the spear shafts into the mud in dark red streams. Though the greenskins counterattacked ferociously, they could not stop the disciplined human soldiers. An orc rushed the cavalry with a stone axe, but was cleaved through the waist by a saber as he leaped, his body splitting and his innards spilling into the muck. Goblin archers loosed volleys at the riders, but their arrows clanged off soldiers' shields. The cavalry turned and cut the archers down. Scarface tried to lead the remaining goblins to intercept from the flank, but he was singled out by 2 cavalrymen after only a few paces. Sabers sang as they descended, and he rolled clumsily to evade, picking up a fresh wound on his shoulder. "Damn it! We can't catch them," he snarled, watching the human force slip into the woods to the east. He punched a nearby tree trunk in fury. Leaves trembled and drifted down. The greenskins continued to roar and fling stones toward the retreating humans, but they could only watch helplessly as the humans vanished into the night. When the fighting finally died down, the camp fell into a heavy silence, filled only with the rasping breaths of the greenskins and the groans of the wounded. A pale green light screen suddenly flickered before Scarface's eyes, and the system's cold prompt sounded in his mind. "Congratulations, host, for completing the battle. Hard-won victory. Completed hidden quest. Cunning goblins. Utilized terrain and orcs to tie down the enemy, achieving the tactical goal of overcoming the strong with the weak. Reward. Night Goblins Tribe Implantation. Night Goblins can be generated in the mushroom field within the territory, and Night Goblins tribes will be attracted. Gained trait. Poison coating. Goblin weapons can be coated with homemade poison, reducing enemy movement speed. Gained 187 WOG points. System comment. Goblins who love ambushes are Gork and Mork's favorite. Scarface stood frozen for a moment, then a flicker of joy lit his eyes. The losses had been heavy, but the rewards were perfectly timed. Night Goblins excelled at nocturnal ambushes, exactly the scout capability his tribe lacked. The poison coating trait was even more useful. With poisoned weapons, his goblins could slow enemies and hold them even if they could not kill them outright. Those 2 gains alone would raise the tribe's combat power significantly. He pushed himself up, leaning on his iron-hafted axe, and surveyed the field. His chest tightened. The muddy ground was piled with bodies, about 50 human soldiers' corpses, some sliced, others torn apart by orcs, chainmail flung aside. There were more orc corpses, well over 100, green skin stained dark brown with blood, some still clutching weapons as if defiantly dying with their eyes open. Of the goblins who had gone into the battle, 130-odd, only 50-odd remained. Most were archers hiding in trees or on higher ground. The spearmen had been almost wiped out. "Boss, we lost too many," Big Valley said as he staggered over, clutching a bleeding shoulder. His voice trembled. The goblin archers around him were spent, some with empty quivers, some limping, all of them wearing fear in their eyes as they looked to Scarface. Scarface nodded quietly, but his mind was already calculating. Heavy as the losses were, nearly 200 orcs had been freed and over 100 remained alive. If he could bring them under his control, the tribe would not only recover but climb to a new level of strength. Before he could speak, a hostile gaze fell on them. The orc captives, who had just shared a common enemy, now ringed the goblins. Their green hides were taut, red eyes flashing with greed and savagery. Some leered at the goblins' bows and arrows. Others licked their lips as they appraised the goblins' small frames, clearly not taking these half-height greenskins seriously. One burly orc stepped forward and ground a goblin corpse beneath his boot with a brutal crunch, glaring at Scarface. "Everyone, stop!" Scarface snapped, lifting his iron axe. He knew that any sign of weakness would prompt an attack. Greenskins lived by might makes right. Without strength, mercy would only make them prey. "My name is Scarface," he called out, his voice carrying across the hollowed camp, "and I'm the one who led my people to break the prisoner carts and pull you out of death. Now will you follow me? Follow me, and you'll have meat to eat, battles to fight, and you'll grow stronger." Laughter burst from the orc ring. "Ha ha ha! You runt? You want us to follow you? Think you're big enough for one good punch? Give up your weapons, little goblin, and maybe we'll spare your hide." Scarface's face went green with fury. He waved to the archers behind him. They knocked arrows at once, points all aimed at the orcs. "Say another word and we'll shoot you dead right now," he barked. The laughter died. Orcs shifted, weapons raised, the mood snapping tight with tension. As a fight threatened to erupt again, Scarface raised a hand to quiet his own people. "Don't be impulsive." He knew greenskin temperaments too well. Bluster would only stoke their savagery. Respect among greenskins was won by proving strength. Scarface stepped forward and fixed his gaze on the orc crowd. "You think I'm small? You think I'm weak? Fine. We'll do this by greenskin rules." He pointed with his axe and threw down the gauntlet. "Let the strongest orc among you step forward and fight me one-on-one. If I lose, my goblins and I will be your servants. If he loses, you all will follow me and obey my commands." "Do you dare?" Silence fell among the orcs, surprise flickering in their red eyes before excitement replaced it. Strength decided everything among greenskins. Single combat settled claims where words could not. Murmurs ran through the crowd. "This little goblin's gutsy. One-on-one, I want to see that. Let me, I'd kill him with one punch." A tall orc pushed through the others. He stood nearly 7.5 feet tall, more massive than the rest, green hide scarred and puckered. A knife scar ran from the forehead over his left eye to his right ear. He pushed aside anyone in his way, strode up to Scarface, and boomed, "I am Bone Tree. I will fight you." Scarface looked up at Bone Tree, quickly assessing. Bone Tree's arm was thicker than Scarface's waist, and he gripped a stone club bound with a chain. The orc exuded oppression. The other orcs made no protest. Clearly they accepted Bone Tree as their champion. Scarface inclined his head and said, voice steady, "Good. I'll fight you. The arena is right here. Whoever falls first loses." Bone Tree grinned, tusks bared. "Don't worry. I'll make your death quick." He slammed his stone club into a nearby prisoner cart with a thunderous crack. Thick planks splintered and flew in all directions, a show of force meant to cow Scarface. The goblin archers clutched their bows in nervous hands. "Boss, should we all go in? That orc is too strong," someone cried. "No," Scarface said, waving them back. His eyes narrowed. He knew a true one-on-one fight had to be his alone. If his goblins interfered, a victory would mean nothing. Greenskins would never truly submit. He drew in a breath and silently intoned, "System, use shaman magic. Leopard speed, bear strength, eagle eye." Shaman magic leopard speed activated, movement speed increased by 50%, agility enhanced. Shaman magic bear strength activated, strength increased by 80%, defense enhanced. Shaman magic eagle eye activated, visual acuity enhanced, dynamic vision strengthened. 3 faint green lights erupted from Scarface, spiraling around him. A phantom leopard merged into his limbs, making his movements instant and lithe. A phantom black bear flowed into his torso, his muscles swelled, his already stout frame growing a few inches taller, his beast-hide armor stretching tight. A phantom eagle sank into his eyes, his pupils pinched, and the world sharpened. The smallest tremor in Bone Tree's muscles, the precise arc of the club, every motion suddenly crystal clear. The camp went still. Mockery fled the orcs' faces, replaced by shock. They had never seen a goblin glow like that, never seen one gain such sudden power. The goblin archers erupted into cheers. "Boss is awesome! Go, boss, go!" Bone Tree's expression soured into seriousness. He could feel the change. The creature he had seen as an ant now radiated something that made his heart pound. "You're a shaman?" he growled, tightening his grip on the club. He no longer dared to sneer. Scarface flexed, savoring the surge of strength, a grin of grim confidence on his lips. He raised his iron axe slowly, his voice deeper from the magic's effect. "Come then, show me how strong you really are." Bone Tree inhaled, abandoning hesitation, and swung his stone club at Scarface. The club whistled through the air, falling like a small mountain. If it landed, it would shatter bone and skull. Every eye in the camp fixed on the duel that would determine who they would follow, and the air itself seemed to thicken with the weight of that single strike. 50. Win! Win! Roar! Bone Tree's furious roar shook the air. He gripped his stone axe and charged at Stone. At 2.3 meters tall, he carried an overwhelming presence. Each step through the mud sent splashes half a meter high. The stone axe arced through the air toward Stone's head. If it connected, it would have split him in two. Stone's pupils narrowed as the magic of leopard speed surged to its peak. He lunged left, his body sweeping across the muddy ground like a gust of wind. The stone axe slammed into the spot where he'd just been with a thunderous boom, throwing up mud and gravel and leaving a shallow pit. Before Bone Tree could retract the weapon, Stone had already rolled to his feet, gripped his iron axe with both hands, and drove it savagely at Bone Tree's waist. Clang! Bone Tree reacted with blistering speed, blocking hastily with his stone axe. The blades met in a deafening clash and sent Stone stumbling backward. A pain like pins and needles shot through Stone's hand and up his arm. Bone Tree's strength far exceeded what he'd expected. If not for the bare strength enhancement, his iron axe might have been ripped from his grasp. Bone Tree, too, was jolted back 2 steps and looked at Stone in surprise. "I didn't expect you, little goblin, to be so strong." He barely finished speaking before he swung again, charging with the stone axe whistling through the air. Each strike came with a crushing rush, forcing Stone to retreat step after step. Around them, the greenskins had formed a loose circle. The goblins stood on tiptoe, chanting nervously, "Go, boss, Stone!" The orcs waved their weapons and roared, "Bone Tree, take him down!" Shouts of encouragement and cries of battle mixed together, making the duel even more exhilarating. Scarface stood at the very front, clutching his stone chisel, palms slick with sweat. He knew better than anyone that the duel's outcome would decide the Blackrock tribe's future. Stone dodged and searched for an opening. Bone Tree's advantage was raw power and reach. His stone axe had a huge sweeping range, but that also made his movements comparatively slow. Stone relied on leopard speed to evade at the last moment and used his smaller frame to slip behind Bone Tree. Finally, when Bone Tree swung again toward Stone's chest, Stone seized the moment. He didn't dodge, he ducked low, letting the axe graze over his head, and with both hands brought his iron axe down on Bone Tree's knee. Thud. The iron bit into an old injury on the outside of Bone Tree's knee. It didn't break the bone, but it made him howl. His right leg buckled, and he nearly fell to his knees. "Now!" Stone's eyes flashed. He rose and leaped, planting a crushing kick square on Bone Tree's chest. He poured everything into it. Bear strength amplified the blow. Bone Tree stumbled backward, barreling into the watching orcs and knocking several to the ground. "Blast it!" Bone Tree recovered, clutching his bleeding knee, eyes raging. He tossed his stone axe aside and lunged forward with bare hands. "If weapons won't work, we'll settle it with fists." Greenskins held close-quarters combat in the highest esteem. To them, bare-handed fighting was the truest test of strength. Stone threw his iron axe away as well, flexed his wrists, and a cold smile cut his battered face. "Just what I wanted." They collided. Bone Tree's fists were larger than Stone's head, each punch whistling through the air and thudding into flesh. Stone took a brutal hit to the chest, feeling blood and chi churn, and a metallic tang rise in his mouth. He grit his teeth and endured, swinging a backhand that snapped Bone Tree's head sideways and drew blood from his lip. Bang, bang, bang. Fists pounded flesh. Both fighters abandoned technique for raw ferocity, trading blows without hesitation. Stone's face ballooned with swelling, his left eye blackened, his mouth split and bleeding. Bone Tree bore a swelling across his forehead, a bleeding nose, and a chest marked by fists. Neither relented. Bone Tree fought for the pride of an orc chieftain, never to be bossed by a goblin. Stone fought for the tribe's future, for the goblin brothers who had died in battle. If he paid this price and still couldn't unite the greenskins, he would lose his mind. Dawn crept over the forest, and the first rays of morning pierced the battlefield, illuminating the blood and mud. Stone and Bone Tree still fought, both exhausted. Their blows slowed and grew lighter, but neither stopped. Stone's arms could barely lift. He resorted to ramming his forehead into Bone Tree's chest. Bone Tree's legs trembled, but he clung on and drove his knees into Stone's stomach. Thud! They collapsed together into the mud, sending up a cloud of murky water. Both lay gasping, chests heaving, too spent even to lift a hand. Stone's skin was bruised and torn, the left eye nearly shut. His animal hide armor hung in tatters. Bone Tree fared worse. His knee still bled, his jaw swollen so high he could barely speak. Silence fell over the greenskins. Everyone held their breath, fixed on the two sprawled on the ground. The goblins clenched their fists in fear that Stone might not rise. The orcs watched Bone Tree with mixed expressions. If the chieftain lost, they would have to follow greenskin law and submit to a goblin leader. Time seemed to freeze. The only movement, the slow crawl of morning light across the blood and mud. Then Stone's fingers twitched. He forced his arm under himself, pushed up through pain, and began to crawl. Each motion sent white-hot tearing through his wounds, cold sweat mixed with blood and mud on his face. He forced himself inch by inch until finally he staggered to his feet. His body shook, but he managed to straighten. Bone Tree lay watching him. A flash of unwillingness passed across his face. Then his eyes drooped shut. He had lost. Stone panted, his battered face turning to the gathered greenskins. His gaze was fierce. Orcs who still harbored defiance lowered their heads, unwilling to meet him. The goblins erupted into cheers. Scarface was the first to rush forward, shouting, "Boss won! Boss Stone won!" Congratulations, host, on completing the hidden mission. Defeat a greenskin larger than yourself. Very violent. The war boss, god of Wah, likes you a lot. He likes brutal boys. You are very wag. Gained attribute, brawler, melee attack +5. He won. Boss won. The goblins whooped and hugged one another, waved weapons, and some young ones jumped in excitement. The orcs were stunned for a heartbeat. Then one threw down his weapon, dropped to a knee, and barked to Stone. "I'm convinced. From now on, I'll follow you." One became many. More orcs knelt, roaring. "We're convinced. Boss Stone." Even Bone Tree hauled himself up, disheveled and humiliated, and bowed his head to Stone. "I lost. From now on, you're in charge." Stone looked over the kneeling orcs and then at the cheering goblins. A grim, brilliant smile spread across his bruised face. Despite the pain, a fierce pride filled him. This bloody struggle had not been in vain. Nearly 200 orcs had finally joined the Blackrock tribe. Morning light climbed higher, bathing the camp and Stone's upright figure in brightness. 54. Passionate young men. 3 days after the brutal fighting, the morning mist in the howling forest still hadn't fully burned off, but the Blackrock tribe camp had already returned to its usual liveliness. Inside the wooden palisade, green bodies were everywhere. Squigs hauled planks and darted across the building site, their short legs moving impossibly fast as they hummed off-key work songs. Goblin lads stood in the open area with stone spears, training and letting out battle cries that rattled the trees. The orcs clustered around the bonfire, chopping salvaged wood with stone axes, their green skin glowing in the flames. No one would have guessed this place had seen bloodshed only 3 days before. Especially the endlessly energetic Gretchen, war meant little fear to them, and a great deal of joy. They loved fighting beside the boss, grabbing human food, and watching their orc brothers beat the humans senseless. This was far more fun than digging in the mushroom beds. The newly joined orc boys were even more pleasantly surprised. They had expected all greenskin camps to be filthy and chaotic and had been ready to settle for shabby mushroom soup. Instead, Blackrock's mushroom fields grew fat and plentiful. There was fresh roasted meat nearly every day. Over 90 goats and more than 20 chickens roamed inside the fence, and on rare days, they even got eggs. Best of all, the tribe had proper latrines and hot pools, no more scrambling to relieve themselves in the bushes. The two rules, use the latrine on time and bathe regularly, were a hard adjustment. The orc boys had been used to going wherever they pleased. What did they know of hygiene? At first, a few still defecated by the wooden huts, but Stone caught them and beat them until their faces were black and blue. Meanwhile, the goblins kept fanning the flames, hoisting up the statue of Gork and Mork and proclaiming, "Boss Stone is Gork and Mork's chosen. Listen to the boss, and you listen to Gork and Mork, or they'll scorn you." The orc boys were skeptical, but they no longer dared break the rules. They began using the latrines and bathing weekly. Fortune favored the tribe. The unequal battle hadn't cost the camp much. The palisade had only a few breaks from the cavalry and was quickly repaired by the pieging sappers. The mushroom fields, lumberyard, and quarry remained intact. The human supplies abandoned in the scuffle had greatly enriched the tribe's stores. More importantly, the survivors had changed. After tasting blood, the goblin lad's eyes carried a hint of killing intent, and they were no longer as timid. The orc boys had grown taller, their muscles tighter, their movements edged with the ruthlessness of recent combat. That morning, like any other, the greenskin Stone summoned gathered in the central square. In front of the large statue of Gork and Mork, they chattered and argued. Some goblins boasting how many human archers they'd shot down, some orcs bragging how many soldiers they'd hacked apart, even the squigs miming with their tiny claws how many stones they'd helped haul. It felt like a festival. A commotion at the square's entrance drew all heads. Stone stepped out of his grass hut, his wounds mostly healed, a few shallow scars crisscrossing his face. In his hand, he held a new long-handled machete, its blade gleaming cold. It was one of the human weapons abandoned when the slaver squad fled in panic. "Boss!" someone shouted, and a roar rose up through the camp. Spears and axes were raised. Squigs teetered on tiptoe, chittering their adoration in their own way. Stone looked over the lively crowd and felt his chest swell. The roars told him the lad's injuries were no longer serious. It was time to get back to work. Territory building couldn't stop. He walked to the center of the square and raised a hand. The noise dropped away. Hundreds of green heads turned to him, eyes bright and worshipful. Stone to them was almost like Gork and Mork themselves, the one to lead them to meat and battle. "Lads!" Stone bellowed, lifting the machete high so the light flashed off its blade. "We won. We smashed those human slaver squads. We crushed anyone who stood against us. And we grabbed tons of loot the humans left behind. We won." "Whack!" came the thunderous answer. Arms, spears, axes, and bone clubs waved. The roar shook the trees. Bone Tree, standing at the front of the orcs, shouted the loudest. Don't assume all greenskins are merely brutes. Bone Tree was sharp. He'd long seen that Stone not only fought well, but could lead the tribe to a better life. A boss like this meant bigger fights and more meat. Just then, a pale green light shivered up before Stone's eyes, and a voice, or a system prompt, echoed in his mind. "Congratulations, host, for completing the main quest, Bigger Territory, Subdue Orcs, Expand Tribe Influence. Quest reward 2 value. 1 blueprint for the Green Mushroom Tavern. Special unit, Arachnary Giant Spider." Additional hint, the host's subordinate units have reached upgrade standards. Gretchen X79 can be upgraded to Pieging Laborers. Each upgrade requires 1 WOG value, totaling 79 points. Stone's eyes lit up. 200 WOG value, the most he'd ever gained at once. The Green Mushroom Tavern blueprint and the Arachnary Giant Spider sounded impressive too, but his first thought went to the Gretchen upgrade. The WOG value chest had been empty previously, used up on buildings and shamanic magic. Now, with 200 points, his first priority was to reward those hardworking Gretchen and make them Pieging Laborers. They had served him faithfully, building latrines, mending huts, lugging battlefield supplies, never slacking, and already meeting the upgrade standards. System, upgrade all 79 Gretchen to Peejing laborers, Stone muttered inwardly. Confirm consuming 79 WAG value. Gretchen upgrade commencing. Upgrade complete. The light flickered, and the 79 Gretchen in the square were suddenly bathed in pale green light. Seconds later, it faded, and the once small, scrawny Gretchen had changed. They were a little taller, arms thicker, and the wooden shovels and stone axes felt easier in their hands. Their eyes no longer darted nervously. Instead, they held a new, steady focus. "Gulu! Boss!" one of the upgraded Peejing laborers cried, raising his shovel and thrusting it towards Stone, face alight with excitement. Stone nodded, pleased. He knew the value of Peejing laborers, born builders, fast and efficient. One could do the work of 4 or 5 ordinary Gretchen, and for tasks that required dexterity, smoothing stone slabs, setting wooden frames, mixing mortar, the Peejing laborers excelled. With these 79 added to the workforce, construction would speed up. The Green Mushroom Tavern could begin soon. The Arachnari giant spider could be placed in a proper spot, and he could even consider opening another quarry for future upgrades. Stone glanced at the expectant greenskins and then at the system readout. The remaining WAG value read 121 points, enough for smaller needs ahead. He raised his machete again and roared. "Lads, next we're building a tavern and fixing up storage. There's more work to do. Do it well and I'll treat you to roasted whole goats." WAG! The camp erupted once more, louder than before. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, scattering over the square and lighting the excited green faces. The Blackrock tribe's future looked bright and hungry. The blizzard in the howling forest arrived without warning. Overnight, the entire Blackrock tribe was buried beneath a thick white blanket. Wooden fences, thatched huts, even the top of the statue of Brother Mao Air wore half a foot of snow. The cold wind drove ice pellets against the greenskins' leather armor with a steady whistling, but there was no sign of gloom in the camp. The Peejing laborers were out in the open on the tribe's east side, working against the drift. Their wooden saws and stone axes flashed cold light as they built a low shed barely half a person's height. Inside, on a thick wool blanket, loot from a human slaver squad, lay an egg the size of a basketball. Its shell was deep purple, veined with silver sigils, and it trembled now and then as if something inside shifted. It was the system-rewarded Arachnari giant spider egg, priceless to Shito. "Easy, don't crack it." Shito squatted beside the shelter and gingerly rested his hand on the shell. He felt a faint warmth through the cold and could hardly keep his excitement down. The name Arachnari giant spider alone meant a massive creature unit. If it hatched and grew, it would be a devastating weapon for sieges and assaults, silk to tangle foes, sharp chelicerae to rend armor, and stealthy movement through the woods that made it far more useful than any goblin scout. To Shito and the 5 Peejing laborers assigned to it, the egg was treated like an ancestor. They took shifts guarding the shed, keeping a charcoal fire at a safe distance to maintain warmth without overheating the egg. They gently brushed snow from the shell with clean linen and even ground up dried mushrooms they refused to eat, sprinkling the powder around the shelter while muttering "gurgle, gurgle" like a prayer for a quick hatch. Once, a Gretchen accidentally knocked the shelter's frame and a single snowflake fell across the shell. The other Gretchen pinned him in the snow and thrashed him until he stopped moving. Nobody ever got careless around the shed again. Across the camp, a construction boom was underway. Since the village had been upgraded to level 2, the system had unlocked several new buildings, crucial to boosting the tribe's power. Shito had drawn up the blueprints and nailed them to the wooden board in the council hall for everyone to see. On the open ground west of the camp, orc boys surrounded a circular earthen pit that would become the fighting pit. According to the plans, it would be 30 meters across, its walls faced with bluestone slabs and the floor thickly sanded to cushion blows. A ring of wooden stands would seat spectators. The fighting pit had 2 purposes: to train orc boys into independent warriors and to settle disputes. Any greenskin, orc or goblin, with a complaint wouldn't brawl across the camp anymore. They would fight in the pit, and the loser would submit to the winner. It would hone strength while keeping order. "Set the slabs higher. Don't have the lads falling out when they fight." Big Valley barked. shirtless despite the cold, hammering slabs into place and tapping the walls to make sure they wouldn't shift. A few restless orc boys were already shoving each other at the bottom of the pit, eager to be first, but Big Valley glared them into line. Not until it's finished. If any of you start now, I'll make you haul dung. To the north, the goblins were clearing ground for a junkyard. Though it was called a junkyard, it was actually the foundation of the Greenskins technology tree. Greenskins were experts at scavenging. A broken human sword, gears discarded by ratmen, a worn stone axe, put into goblin hands, these scraps could be dismantled, modified, and reborn as new tools and weapons. Shito had the goblins pile the damaged armor and broken spears taken from the slaver squad here so the lads could rummage once the yard was finished. What Shito anticipated most were two military structures, the Vile Tent and the Squig Pen. The Vile Tent, on the wood's eastern edge, would be a low thatched shed full of training stakes and hidden compartments to train vile stalkers. These goblins were brutal specialists, masters of ambush who lurked in shadows and attacked without warning, stabbing knees with bone daggers or dropping from trees to slit throats. Once they latched on, they used every torturous trick, disemboweling or gouging, holding on even if stomped flat. The thought of vile stalkers slipping between enemy spear formations thrilled Shi-Tu. They would be perfect for breaking disciplined human ranks. The Squig Pen would go by the pond next to the mushroom field, where squigs liked to hide at the bottom. Built of thick timber and surrounded by barbed wire seized from a human camp, it would make capturing and raising squigs easier. From it, they'd train squig cavalry, goblins riding squigs, and squig hoppers, nimble riders who sent their mounts pouncing through rough terrain. Let a squig bite an enemy's leg while a goblin jabbed with a stone spear, and you had speed and ferocity combined. To gather materials quickly, the quarry and lumberyard buzzed day and night. In the quarry, 30 goblins with iron chisels and stone hammers chipped at the rock. Their clangs carried across the snowy plain. Shito had pieging sappers rig up simple pulleys so 2 goblins could move bluestone slabs that once took 5. At the lumberyard, 50 orc boys worked in teams, felling cold-hardy hardwoods, splitting logs, coating timber with tung oil to prevent rot. The goblins built a temporary wooden shed at the yard and kept charcoal fires burning so the laborers could work without freezing. Timber piled into a small mountain each day, enough to keep the builders busy. If only we had iron ore, Shito muttered at the quarry, watching slabs being hauled out. Most tools and weapons in the tribe were still stone or wood. Only a few iron pieces had been captured. If they could find iron and forge iron axes, spears, and armor, their construction speed and combat power would leap forward. A stone axe took half a day to fell a tree. An iron axe could do it in an hour. A stone spear couldn't pierce human chainmail, but an iron spear could. He had sent wave after wave of goblin scouts into the forest to search for ore, but they always came back empty-handed. For the moment, iron had to wait. Even so, another urgent task remained, appointing a technician to run the junkyard, leading goblins in studying salvage parts and inventing new gear. After thinking it over, Shito chose Big Valley. Though an orc, Big Valley was better with tinkering than most goblins. He had dismantled and reassembled a broken sword from the human camp and figured out basic forging principles. When a cartwheel broke, he reinforced it with iron sheets so it could carry more. In the tribe, Big Valley was the only one Shito trusted with technological work. "Big Valley, come here," Shito called across the quarry. Big Valley wiped stone dust off his arms and hurried over. "Boss, the junkyard's nearly ready. I'm making you technician. You'll lead the goblins in studying scrap and inventing new stuff." Shito clapped the orc on the shoulder. "Don't disappoint me. If you can get us iron weapons, I'll give you a whole roasted sheep." Big Valley's eyes lit up. Technician, inventing things, and a whole roasted sheep. He straightened, beat his chest, and proclaimed, "Don't worry, boss. I'll do a fine job. I'll make usable iron tools for you in less than half a month." Shito nodded, satisfied. He looked over the bustling camp, the shed with the precious spider egg, the rising fighting pit, the growing junkyard and lumber stacks, and felt a thrill of anticipation. Once these buildings stood and the spider hatched, once iron came into their hands, the Blackrock tribe's strength would climb to a new level. They would not only hold the howling forest, they could take on larger greenskin tribes. The wind and snow kept falling, but they could not damper the greenskins' enthusiasm. 56. Green Mushroom Tavern. In the afternoon, after the blizzard had subsided, sunlight filtered through the clouds and laid a warm gold over the Blackrock tribe's snow-covered roofs. A cheer rose from the south side of the central square. After 10 days of hard work by the Peking laborers and engineers, the Green Mushroom Tavern was finally finished. The tavern wasn't grand, but it had character. A pointed wooden cabin built from logs, whitewashed with lime plaster, a thick thatched roof, and strings of dried mushrooms hanging under the eaves. Several beast and ratman skeletons were displayed as decoration. Over the door hung a wooden sign painted with a grinning green mushroom in charcoal ash, the tavern's emblem. The Peking laborers circled it, still holding unused wooden hammers, faces bright with pride. This was the first place to drink they had built with their own hands. Shito hurried over, followed by Scarface and several goblins. He stood before the tavern and opened the system light screen to check its attributes. The moment he touched the Green Mushroom Tavern icon, a new prompt appeared. Temporary quest triggered. Grand opening. Quest requirements. 1. Prepare 13 medium mushrooms and 189 small mushrooms. 2. Select 2 goblins for 1 month of closed-door training. Upon completion, they will become bound tavern retainers, unique employees. Quest reward, 2 ordinary retainer slots. Need to train retainers, huh? Shido raised an eyebrow, then understood. Special buildings often require dedicated staff. Ordinary goblins wouldn't do. Seeing the mushroom requirement made him relax. The large mushroom field yielded huge quantities weekly. Gathering 13 medium and 189 small mushrooms would be easy. The true question was which 2 goblins to train. Shito scanned the lively crowd of greenskins in the square and settled on the nearby livestock pen. Skinny Pole and Chubby were squatting by the fence, adding hay for the goats, occasionally huddling together and whispering. The 2 brothers had been among the first goblins to follow Shito. They'd worked for him since the tribe was little more than a wooden hut, and they'd always taken care of the animals flawlessly. When opportunities like the tavern opened up, it was precisely the kind of advancement they deserved. Skinny Pole, Chubby, come here, Shito called. They dropped the hay and ran over, a few strands of goat hair clinging to them. Boss, what is it? The tavern is opening. It needs 2 people to be trained as staff. Are you willing to go? Shito asked, hopeful. Skinny Pole and Chubby exchanged a stunned, delighted look. They'd heard the tavern was where you could eat and drink good things every day. Becoming staff there would be an incredible stroke of luck. Chubby's voice trembled as he nodded. Willing! We're willing! Skinny Pole, too excited to speak, just rubbed his hands together. Shito smiled and patted their shoulders. Train hard, don't disappoint me. Over the next few days, Shito had workers bring mushrooms from the field and ordered the Peking laborers to clean the tavern. A month later, when Skinny Pole and Chubby emerged, they were transformed. Skinny Pole wore tight black leather, a red bow tied around his waist, and carried a wooden brewing barrel. He looked lively and proud. Chubby wore a white chef's uniform, slightly smudged but neat, with a tall chef's hat and an iron spatula in hand. Shito opened the system screen and read their new statuses. Chubby, Green Mushroom Tavern exclusive chef, skill, gourmet soothing. Food prepared can boost green skin morale and reduce irritability. Skinny Pole, Green Mushroom Tavern exclusive brewer. Skill, fine wine buff. Brewed beverages slightly increase greenskin's stamina recovery speed and can serve as trade currency, boosting the territory's economic vitality. Even more surprising was the system prompt. When Skinny Pole and Chubby preside over the Green Mushroom Tavern, the territory's development increases by 12 points annually, and compliance increases by 12 points. Those were far stronger bonuses than ordinary buildings offered. The development attribute would speed infrastructure progress, and compliance would reduce internal strife. It was a huge win. Come on, let's go inside and try your skills. Shito led the way while Scarface stood guard outside, shooing away curious youngsters peeking in the doorway. No disturbances allowed during the boss's taste test. Warmth enveloped them as they stepped inside. The tavern wasn't large, but was comfortably arranged. Strings of dried mushrooms and animal hides on the walls, thick wool blankets spread on the floor, 4 rough wooden tables with chairs, and a roaring fire in the corner, crackling cheerfully. Behind the bar, Skinny Pole and Chubby were waiting. The counter had been carved from a single oak plank and wiped clean, with wooden mugs and a barrel of fungal beer ready. "Boss, what would you like to eat? What would you like to drink?" Chubby asked, rubbing his hands nervously and eagerly. Skinny Pole added, "We can make grilled mushroom slices and brew fungal beer. We followed your methods exactly, boss. Want to try?" "Bring me an order of grilled mushroom slices and 2 mugs of fungal beer." Shido sat at the bar and picked up a rough but well-polished wooden mug. Chubby ducked into the tiny kitchen partitioned behind the bar. Soon the sizzle of grilling and the rich mushroom aroma filled the air. Skinny Pole ladled beer from the barrel and poured it into the mug, light brown with a fine blue foam crown. Even before drinking, there was a faint scent of malt and fresh mushrooms. "Try the beer first, boss." Skinny Pole pushed the mug forward, eyes bright. Shito took a long swallow. The beer was slightly bitter at first, with a refreshing sweetness afterward. A warm trickle slid from his throat to his stomach and seemed to chase away fatigue. The flavor reminded him of the craft beers he'd drunk in his previous life, so familiar it nearly brought tears to his eyes. It was the best alcohol he'd tasted since transmigrating. "It's good, delicious," he said, and Skinny Pole beamed. Chubby emerged with an iron plate of golden brown grilled mushroom slices, dusted with foraged herbs and brushed with a little honey. The aroma made Shito's mouth water. He picked up a slice. The mushroom was tender, slightly charred, honey-sweet with a fresh herb fragrance and a pleasant chew. Paired with the beer, it was perfect. He ate and drank, feeling utterly satisfied, probably the best meal he'd had since arriving in this green-skin world. "You both did very well." Shito set down his mug and looked at them approvingly. "The tavern is yours. Work hard and you won't miss the rewards." They nodded eagerly, faces alight. The boss's approval meant everything. 57. Green Mushroom Tavern. Watching Stone set his glass down with a look of pure satisfaction, Chubby and Skinny Pole let out a quiet sigh of relief. A month of intensive, closed-door training had not been for nothing. Winning the boss's approval proved it. Since the first day they'd stepped into the tavern, they hadn't left. They'd learned to cook and brew from scratch, come away with blistered hands and clothes blackened by smoke, and secretly fretted over getting scolded for wasting too many mushrooms. Now it all seemed worth it. Chubby rubbed his flour-dusted hands and already plotted improvements. Maybe shredded roasted meat with the mushroom slices next time. Surely the boss would like that even more. Skinny Pole stared at the brewing barrel, mentally recalculating fermentation times to make the mushroom wine richer. Being recognized had become their greatest motivation to keep getting better and invent new dishes. They remembered every harsh lesson of the past month. Chubby had stood at the iron stove every day, wrestling with the dancing flames. At first, he couldn't control the heat. Mushrooms were either burnt black or half raw, and 2 whole baskets of fresh mushrooms went to waste before he learned to slow roast over low heat, brushing on honey and sprinkling herbs to deepen the flavor. Skinny Pole had been in the dark cellar, stirring fermenting mushroom pulp daily, juggling temperature and humidity. His early barrels were either too sour or too bland. It took 3 failed barrels before he finally brewed a mushroom wine with a faint malty aroma. When the system finally flashed "training complete," both of them relaxed. The notification meant they were officially tavern employees and unlocked exclusive benefits. As bound retainers of the Green Mushroom Tavern, they now had a permanent buff of Strength +5 and Constitution +5 while inside the tavern. In practice, that made them 2 to 3 times as strong as an ordinary goblin in that small wooden house. "If some blind fool causes trouble, I can punch him flying." Chubby clenched his fists, grinning at the sudden surge of power. Skinny Pole nodded, gripping his stirring spoon like a club. "If anyone dares smash the tavern's tables, I'll bonk him with this." They'd long expected trouble. Greenskins were naturally belligerent, and once the tavern opened, drunken goblins and orcs would surely brawl there. Then Chubby and Skinny Pole would be cooking and brewing by day and tavern security by night. Plenty of chances to fight. They might not get battlefield glory often, but as long as there were bar brawls every day, life looked good to them. Stone, unaware of their beating plan, sat at the bar, savoring the food and wine. Only now did his real purpose come back to him. When Chubby urged him to roast another portion of mushroom slices and Skinny Pole busied himself with another barrel, Stone waved them off. "No need. You two keep working. I'll just sit for a bit." He moved to an empty table and opened the system's light screen in his mind. With the grand opening quest completed, the tavern's full attributes were unlocked. The vague special building tag was gone. Lines of text flowed across the light screen. Building name, Filthy Green Mushroom Hero Tavern. Building type, Special Functional Building, unlocked at Tier 2 Village. Base output, extra output of mushroom wine x 5 units week. Operation requirements, requires 1 bound chef, 1 bound brewer, currently met, Chubby, Skinny Pole. Building effect 1, territory, development, 12th year, promotes economic circulation and technological innovation. Building effect 2, territory obedience, plus 12th year, provides an outlet for greenskin conflict, reduces probability of internal strife. Special note, food and drink prices within the tavern can be set independently by the Lord, supports settlement with greenskin teeth, common currency. It really is a special building, totally different effects, Stone thought. 5 extra units of mushroom wine per week and the ability to set prices and collect money independently were far more useful than a simple production building. He'd long noticed how greenskins used teeth for currency, teeth pulled from enemies or those that fell out naturally, with sharper, sturdier ones valued more highly. Most teeth had come from spoils before. Now the tavern provided a stable way to accumulate wealth. The cost to operate was laughably low. Ingredients came from their own mushroom field, basically free. Chubby and Skinny Pole's wages were only 10 ordinary teeth a month, a pittance compared to what the tavern could bring in. More importantly, the tooth recycling channel would kickstart internal economic circulation. Goblin lads would hunt and work harder to earn teeth so they could drink and eat at the tavern, and the tribe could use the teeth to trade for outside resources. A virtuous cycle. The obedience increase made immediate sense. The irritable spores in greenskins needed an outlet. Before they either worked or fought, but now tavern brawls offered a controlled release. After venting in drunken melees, they'd become more compliant. The system's design was perfectly suited to greenskin nature. Stone felt oddly appreciative of its thoughtfulness. A worry surfaced, though. What if they smashed the tavern during a fight? Would the system repair it automatically? He couldn't be expected to fix tables and chairs himself. He mulled it over and realized the tribe had plenty of pigeon laborers. Repairing furniture would be trivial for them. A few sips of mushroom wine as a reward would make those Gretchen scurry faster than anyone to fix the place. What thrilled Stone most was the extra 5 units of mushroom wine per week. The glass he'd just drunk was nothing compared to the 1 unit. In system terms, 1 unit equaled a large wooden barrel of mushroom wine, enough for him to drink for several days alone. 5 big barrels every week meant constant supply, drunken revelry whenever he pleased. Even if he couldn't drink it all, it made a perfect reward. Who trained hardest? Who fought bravest? Reward them with a barrel or a glass of mushroom wine, and they'd howl with gratitude and work harder. Best of all, it was the tribe's first profitable industry. Previously, the tribe relied entirely on spoils and production, with money only flowing out. Stone had always worried they might one day run out of teeth and he'd end up a pauper lord. Now the tavern promised steady income, territorial benefits, and a social outlet, 3 birds with 1 stone. He leaned back, watching the fireplace flames dance, listening to Chubby and Skinny Pole tidy the bar. Anticipation filled him. Once the tavern opened for business, Blackrock Tribe's days would only get better. Mushroom wine to drink, meat to eat, fights to have, and a steady income. Who wouldn't want to follow that tribe? Sunlight streamed through the window and warmed the table. Stone picked up the remaining half glass of mushroom wine, took another sip, and let the sweet taste spread across his tongue. He squinted against the brightness and smiled. The greenskin lord's dream of getting rich was finally beginning. Late at night in the village chief's wooden hut, the campfire had dwindled to glowing embers that danced across Stone's face. He lay propped against a rough wooden bed draped in a wool blanket, clutching a crude animal hide map, charcoal sketched by a goblin scout, marking the terrain around the howling forest. His thoughts, however, had already left the Blackrock tribe and drifted out across the wider Warhammer world. Stone had known a little about this world before he transmigrated, but seeing it from the inside made the picture far clearer. The map of the Warhammer world overlapped with his old world by 80 to 90%. Catastrophe Hold, where the Blackrock tribe stood, was a pivotal region between continents, like the Middle East in his previous life. The climate was harsh and varied, forests and grasslands, stretches of Gobi-like desert, and broken mountains. Most importantly, it was a land of chaos, where humans, greenskins, Skaven, and the occasional chaos cultist all jockeyed for territory in near-constant war. It was a strategic linchpin. He closed his eyes and let a broader continental map form in his head. To the east loomed the World's Edge Mountains, a massive barrier separating Catastrophe Hold from the eastern continent. East of those peaks, the world grew more dangerous. In the Darklands, Chaos dwarves built iron fortresses at the mouths of volcanoes, enslaving people to mine ore and forge war machines of terrible power. In the Mountains of Morn, ogres roamed in nomadic tribes, living by plunder. Their great axes could split human mail, and they swallowed whole sheep in a single bite. Beyond lay the vast eastern steppes, where mounted peoples raided with terrifying mobility, and far to the east still were the distant realms of Grand Cathay and the Nippon kingdoms. Grand Cathay was ancient and powerful, mastering gunpowder and intricate tactics. Nippon revered Bushido, fielding samurai and stealthy shinobi. These eastern powers were the equivalent of Asia in his past life, ancient, well-armed, and not to be underestimated. To the south lay swamps, deserts, and rainforests. The swamps exhaled poisonous miasma and were home to fierce beasts even greenskins avoided. Beneath southern sands, the Nehekaran kingdoms, ancient, Egyptian in flavor, slumbered. The Tomb Kings commanded undead legions, guardians of millennia-old treasures who would unleash bloody vengeance on any who disturbed their rest. The south felt much like Africa in his prior world, mysterious, dangerous, rich with ancient ruin. To the west was the core of the Warhammer world, the Old World, the closest analog to Europe. Multiple human nations crowded that region, each with its own customs and strengths. Kislev in the north lay locked in ice and snow. Its hardy people were fierce in cold-weather warfare, and their winged lancers were famed. Further south stood Britannia, the realm of knights and chivalry, heavily armored cavalry whose charges smashed armies like a torrent of steel. Along the coasts lay Astalia and Tilea, merchant city-states whose navies and musketeers were not to be underestimated. Together with the border princes, they formed a buffer against deserts and greenskin incursions, often cooperating, often fighting among themselves. Above all stood the Empire, founded by Sigmar. It was the largest and most powerful human state. Vast lands, countless cities, a huge army, and technology and magic unmatched across the old world. For 2,000 years, the Empire had weathered chaos, invasions, and assaults by monsters. Its towns were razed and rebuilt on grander scales time and again. Musketeers, halberdiers, steam tanks, and priests of Sigmar formed a solid, battered defense against the encroaching darkness. Other powerful races held sway too. Lizardmen lurked in the deep southern jungles, ancient guardians maintaining order with sorcery and dinosaur legions. Vampire counts moved in the shadows of the old world, marshaling undead armies to seize power. Pirates plundered the seas and built fortunes. Dark elves lurked in their northern realms, masters of cruel sorcery and poisoned weaponry. Wood elves guarded primeval forests, archers of deadly precision, devotees of an extreme green ideology. Skaven, with their foul engines, gnawed away beneath it all. These forces interwove in constant conflict, making the world unpredictable and violent. Stone drew a deep breath and his expression hardened. If he were just any green-skinned chieftain, his options were simple and brutal. Burn, kill, plunder, and fight other tribes, until a stronger power crushed him or he fed the maw of chaos. But he was not ordinary. He was a transmigrator with memories from another life and a system he could use. He refused to be limited to primitive methods. Time was urgent. Chaos was a sword waiting to fall in a continent-wide invasion sooner or later. When that happened, humans, greenskins, and every other people risked being ground under chaos's assault. Fragmented greenskin tribes, however fierce, could not stand against a united chaos host. His goal was bigger than simply expanding the Blackrock tribe. He wanted to resist chaos and change the greenskins' fate. "I must find a faster way to expand my influence," he muttered. Developing only Blackrock would be too slow to outpace chaos. He needed to unite more tribes and consolidate scattered greenskin strength. Greenskins worshipped power. If he could display overwhelming strength and defeat rebellious chieftains, he could bend their tribes to his command and form a massive greenskin army. He also needed to learn from other peoples. Greenskin technology was quirky and improvised, too dependent on flashes of Gork and Mork's inspiration, unstable and unsystematic. The Empire's steam designs, the dwarves' mastery of metalwork, even the Skaven's engineering offered valuable lessons. If he could fuse those technologies with Greenskin's strengths, technology plus brute force, he might stand a chance against chaos. "I won't believe we can't beat chaos," Stone said to himself, clenching his fist. Greenskins were born for war. With proper command and unity, they might be able to hold their ground. Between his system, his knowledge, and the goblins and orcs already under his command, he had assets to build on. He lay turning plans over in his head. How to unite tribes, how to learn foreign technologies, how to steer the Blackrock tribe's future, when a frantic shout came from the doorway. "Boss! Boss! Awake! Urgent business!" Stone snapped open his eyes and sat up. The voice belonged to the goblin scout. From the panicked tone, he knew something serious had happened. He frowned, rose, and pulled the wooden door wide. In the moonlight, the goblin stood sweating and out of breath, clutching a crumpled note, his face a mask of fear. "What happened? Speak slowly," Stone said in a low voice, a line of unease forming across his features. 59. Iron ore. B-boss. Bone tree found iron ore." The goblin scout slumped against the doorway, bent over and gasping, his words broken by breath. Sweat ran down his cheeks, and the bow at his side was slick with it. He'd sprinted back from the canyon without daring to stop. He had to tell Stone at once. Stone's frown smoothed in an instant. He froze as if he hadn't heard properly, then, 3 seconds later, surged into action. "What did you say? You found iron ore?" He seized the scout's arm hard enough to make him wince, but his face lit up with impossible joy. He had sent out wave after wave of scouts with no luck. He never expected Bone Tree to find anything, and certainly not this quickly. It helped that Bone Tree knew his ore. He'd been a minor slave for a human noble for years and could pick out iron at a glance. Stone had only sent Bone Tree and a handful of orc boys into the depths of the howling forest with a "let's try" attitude, since so few greenskins understood mining. He hadn't expected a result like this. "Quick, tell me everything. Where is it? How big?" Stone let go and pressed for details, urgency in his voice. Iron would let them forge real weapons and tools. Quarrying and logging would become far more efficient, and the Blackrock tribe's combat strength would leap. For the tribe, this was a godsend. The scout rubbed his sore arm and rattled off the report. Big Brother Bone Tree led 5 orc boys and found scattered iron ore in Bonebreak Canyon to the west. "It's that dark brown, shiny rock." He knew it right away. They followed the vein deeper into the canyon and found a cave on the south side of the mountain. Went in an hour or two and found a huge iron vein. And the mine looks like it was partly worked and then abandoned by dwarves. The tunnels are already dug, hardly any ore's been taken. A dwarf-abandoned iron mine? Stone's eyes brightened further. Dwarves were masters of mining and forging. Their veins were large and their tunnels organized. If the dwarves had already dug shafts here, the tribe wouldn't have to carve their own, just clear the tunnels and start mining. Efficiency would be an order of magnitude better than finding a new vein. Stone's mind raced. First batch of iron axes and spears for the orc boys, iron chisels and saws for the peon laborers. Building and felling trees would move so much faster. Later, they could forge iron armor. Blackrock's warriors could rival human elites. He was already picturing the tribe's rise. Then the scout's face darkened. "B-boss, one more thing. Big Brother Bone Tree and his group found a tribe living deep inside the cave." The smile left Stone's face. His gaze sharpened, his voice went cold. "What tribe? Humans, Ratmen, other greenskins, anyone who stands between us and that ore, will be torn to pieces. To Stone, the ore was non-negotiable. He was ready to go to war over it. The scout stepped back at the look and stammered, "And not humans, not ratmen. It's a night goblins tribe." Stone's pupils tightened. Night goblins, short, weak, and pale, famous for hiding from daylight, were the last thing he wanted to find guarding the mine. Half a meter tall and dark green-skinned from living in caves, they never left the dark by day. Cowardly and fragile alone, they were nevertheless cunning ambushers, leaping from shadows to stab passersby with poisoned bone daggers, digging covered pits with sharpened spikes, and coating wounds with a black sludge of cave mud, toxic mushrooms, and spider venom that caused swelling, agony, and even unconsciousness. Their tunneling skills were superb, worse than ratmen, so their tunnels could crisscross the caves, appear behind an enemy camp, and vanish, making defense a nightmare. Worse, night goblins hated dwarves and had fought them for centuries. It looked like these goblins had claimed the abandoned dwarf mine. "How strong are they?" Stone asked, steadying himself. Cowardly as they were, night goblins were dangerous in numbers. The scout relayed Bone Tree's notes. "There's quite a few, maybe over 200, and lots of spiders. Individually, they're terrified. Bone Tree showed himself, and some ran away at once. But together they got brave, shouting and throwing stones. They've got a fierce boss with a spiked wooden club. He roared a few times and got them in line. Otherwise, they'd have fallen apart already." Stone nodded. Night goblins were the perfect example of courage in numbers. They were weak alone but bold as a pack, led by their toughest bully to keep order. They were cheap to feed and excellent for ambushes, ideal auxiliary troops. Crucially, they tamed cave spiders into mounts, death crawlers. Fast, able to spin webs to tangle foes, ridden goblins could rain poisoned arrows from their backs. Night goblins worshipped the Arachnari giant spider as a sacred beast, a messenger from Gork and Mork, and would care for such creatures zealously. The thought of the still-hatching giant spider egg flashed through Stone's mind. The system had cataloged night goblins as well. If he could subdue this tribe, they might help raise the giant spider or teach spider taming techniques to create a death crawler unit, an enormous boost. But the iron ore came first, and the night goblins stood between them and the vein. Attack and drive them off? Kill and clear the cave? Or capture and subdue them to serve his purposes? Stone walked to the doorway and looked toward Bonebreak Canyon, its silhouette black under the moon. His fingers idly rubbed the iron axe at his waist. His gaze hardened. No matter what, the iron had to be secured, and the night goblins dealt with. "Go fetch Bone Tree. Have him tell us everything he saw about the night goblins and the cave layout," Stone ordered. "And tell Scarface to gather all the goblins and orcs. We need to plan how to handle this tribe." "Yes, boss," the scout answered and sprinted from the camp, more hurried now than when he arrived. An operation for the night goblins was about to begin. The fire in the wooden hut burned on, lighting Stone's face in half shadow. He stared out at the moonlit forest and calculated. Night goblins were cunning, but they had weaknesses. If he used them right, he could not only seize the iron ore, but possibly turn a new force to the Blackrock tribe's advantage. 60, it's a trap. 60, it's a trap. All orc boys and goblin archers assemble at the square. Stone's shout rolled through the Blackrock tribe and shattered the deep night silence. At the command, the greenskins erupted into motion. Orc boys spilled from their grass huts, some grabbing stone axes, others hefting spiked clubs studded with iron shards. They threw on leather armor and thundered toward the central square. Goblin archers pulled on sheepskin melon hats, slung wooden bows and quivers over their backs and fingers, several herb-coated arrows. Goblin spearmen hefted long iron-tipped spears and trotted along with their short, quick steps. In 15 minutes, the square was filled with the tribe's whole fighting force. 150 orc boys, hulking and scarred, weapons flashing. 80 goblin archers, small but with keen eyes and arrows ready in their quivers, and 30 goblin spearmen, spears leveled and ranks neat, their momentum matching the orcs. Stone stood in the center, looking at his army and nodding with satisfaction. It was the first time the Blackrock tribe had mustered all its warriors since its founding. The numbers were not huge, but every one of them had seen battle, their combat ability far outmatched ordinary greenskin tribes. "Boys, we found iron ore. It's in Bonebreak Canyon, to the west. Stone raised his iron axe and roared. But a bunch of night goblins are occupying the cave and won't let us take it. What do you say we do? Kill them. Steal the iron ore. The orc boys were the first to bellow. Axes and clubs waved as their voices shook the trees. The goblins shouted too, bows and spears high, eyes flashing with hunger for blood and loot. The greenskins thrived on fighting and stealing. Good. Then follow me. Drive the night goblins out and take the ore. Stone waved his hand, then remembered something and turned to the nearby goblin spearmen. Bring the Arachnari giant spider eggs here. Handle them carefully. Don't break them. Several spearmen obeyed at once, carefully carrying the eggs from the eastern shed. They were wrapped in thick wool blankets, the deep purple shells streaked with silver patterns peeking out. Stone had brought the eggs because he knew the night goblins venerated the Arachnari spider. An egg might be a bargaining chip or a distraction at a crucial moment. Even if it proved useless, having it felt safer. With everything ready, Stone led the march to Bonebreak Canyon. The 150 orc boys stamped the ground behind him. 80 goblin archers and 30 goblin spearmen split to either side, forming a huge wedge that moved through the howling forest like a dark tide. Forest creatures scattered at the greenskins' approach. Wolves fled into the underbrush. Owls flapped away from branches to avoid becoming practice targets, while the greenskins hummed off-key war songs, as thrilled as if bound for a feast. Half an hour later, the mouth of Bonebreak Canyon opened before them. Steep cliffs rose on either side, moonlight spilling down in pale pools. The canyon floor was strewn with broken stones, and at the far end, a dark cave gaped. That was where Bone Tree had said the ore lay. Waiting at the cave entrance were Bone Tree and the 5 orc boys he'd taken out earlier. When Stone and the army appeared, Bone Tree hurried over, face bright with excitement. "Boss, you're here. We scouted the night goblins, got everything figured out. Tell me what you saw. How many? How strong are they?" Stone stopped to ask. Bone Tree scratched his head. "Maybe 200 to 300 night goblins. Each rides a little spider as a mount, carrying bone daggers or short bows. They didn't notice us, don't seem to have defenses. If we rush in, we can crush them for sure." Stone frowned. "Did you see how they survive? Any mushroom fields? Animals? Livestock?" Bone Tree thought a moment, then shook his head. "No mushroom fields, no sheep or chickens. We circled the cave and only saw animal bones. They must live by hunting." Stone said nothing and walked to the cave mouth to inspect the place. The entrance was about 2 zhang wide, tall enough for an orc to stand upright. The rock around it was smoothly cut. Faint runes, dwarf characters, were etched across the stone, worn but still legible. Iron ore. Inside the cave, the floor was laid with smooth stone slabs, the seams filled with lime mortar, the work of dwarf hands. Grooves every few paces marked where torches once burned. Not far from the entrance, an old wooden mining cart lay abandoned. Its wheels had rotted away, but the iron axle was still intact. "Right, an abandoned dwarf mine," Stone said, rubbing the wall with a rough hand. The structure and order were unmistakably dwarven. This had once been a proper iron site, abandoned for some unknown reason. But as he scanned the canyon, something nagged at him. The terrain around Bonebreak Canyon was ideal for hiding: rocks, bushes, and uneven ground. The night goblins lived by hunting and would have to go out regularly for prey. It was impossible they wouldn't post scouts to watch the cave. Even a warlike greenskin gang understood basic defenses. A subterranean race like the night goblins would be even more vigilant. "Bone Tree," Stone asked, "when you circled, did you see any suspicious figures? Night goblins hiding in the bushes, spiders clinging to rocks?" Bone Tree paused, searching his memory, then shook his head. "No, we only saw animal bones. No spiders, nothing hiding." Stone's face tightened. That didn't mean the night goblins lacked defenses. It meant their defenses were hidden too well. Just because Bone Tree didn't spot them didn't mean they hadn't been seen. Scouts could already be in the shadows, watching every step. As Stone watched the dark cave mouth, he imagined all the traps that could wait inside. Pits hidden in shafts, roads blocked with rocks, spider-mounted ambushes exploding from the dark. Any careless assault could cost them dearly. These night goblins were craftier than he'd expected, Stone thought. If this were any ordinary greenskin warband, they'd have charged in at the sight of undefended prey, and likely fallen into a deadly trap. Stone wasn't ordinary. His transmigration instincts and the system that guided him had taught him to be cautious. The easier a fight appeared, the more danger it often hid. "Everyone stop. Hold position. No one goes near the cave," Stone ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Goblin archers, spread out on the rocks along the canyon. Watch for movement. If you spot night goblins or spiders, fire an arrow to warn the others. Orc boys, form a defensive ring. Protect the spider eggs and the spearmen in the center. Don't give the enemy an opening." Though surprised, many had been ready to charge. Stone's troops followed. Goblin archers scrambled up the canyon rocks, drawing bows and knocking arrows as they scanned the shadows. The orc boys formed a tight circle around the arachnari eggs and the goblin spearmen, axes and spiked clubs at the ready. Stone took the lead at the front, eyes fixed on the cave mouth. Moonlight painted the greenskins in stark relief, making the cave entrance look even darker by contrast. A taut silence fell over the canyon. Everyone waited for the night goblins' first move and for Stone's order to attack.